Blood doesn't freeze the way you'd think. Even at 20 below, it stays liquid long enough to tell a story, and this one screamed murder. Elias Crow found her half buried in a snowdrift, an iron collar biting into her throat, chains snapped but still clinging to her wrists. She should have been dead. Maybe she wanted to be. But the mountain had other plans. What he pulled from that frozen grave wasn't just a woman, it was a war waiting to happen. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The wind didn't howl in the Montana high country. It shrieked. It tore through the pines like something alive and angry, bending century-old trees until they groaned, scattering snow in blinding sheets that erased the world. Elias Crow had learned long ago not to fight it. You survived the mountain by respecting it, by reading its moods the way other men read newspapers. Tonight, the mountain was furious. He'd been checking his trapline when the storm rolled in, one of those savage, sudden blizzards that could kill a man in minutes if he wasn't careful. Elias was always careful. 43 years of careful. 30 of those years spent alone in these mountains, speaking more to wolves than people, trusting snow more than civilization. His cabin sat another 2 miles northeast, tucked into a granite shelf where the wind couldn't quite reach it. He could make it before full dark if he moved now. The beaver pelts in his pack would fetch good money in the spring, enough to restock his supplies and buy another year of solitude. That's when he saw the ravens. A dozen of them, maybe more, circling something in a clearing below the ridgeline. Their calls cut through even the wind, that particular harsh cawing that meant fresh meat, fresh death. Elias paused, his breath clouding in front of his weathered face. Probably an elk brought down by wolves, maybe a deer that had broken through ice. None of his business either way. The smart thing was to keep moving. But the ravens kept circling, and something about their pattern bothered him. Too tight, too focused, and they weren't descending, just wheeling and calling, like they were waiting for something, or afraid of something. Against his better judgment, Elias shifted his pack and started down the slope. The snow came up past his knees in places, and the wind tried to shove him back with every step. He moved with the practiced efficiency of a man who'd walked these mountains through every season, every storm, finding purchase where others would find only death. His rifle stayed slung across his back. He'd need both hands for this descent. The clearing opened before him suddenly, the way clearings did in storms. One moment, there was nothing but white. The next, he could see 50 feet in every direction. The ravens scattered at his approach, their complaints following them into the gray sky. That's when he saw the blood. It painted the snow in arterial sprays and drag marks, a violent story written in crimson. His first thought was bear, a kill site maybe, or a territorial dispute. But bears didn't move like this, didn't leave trails that spoke of desperation rather than predation. He followed the blood with his eyes, tracking it across the clearing to where it disappeared into a drift against a fallen pine. The drift looked wrong, too high, too concentrated. Something was buried there. Elias approached slowly, his hand moving to the hunting knife at his belt. The wind had started to fill in the blood trails already, nature erasing evidence like it always did. In another hour, this clearing would look pristine again. Whatever tragedy had happened here, forgotten by everything except the mountain itself. He knelt beside the drift and started digging with his hands. The snow came away in chunks, some of it pink with diluted blood. 5 seconds in, his fingers hit fabric. 10 seconds more, and he'd uncovered enough to see dark hair, matted and frozen. A person. Someone had buried a person here, or tried to. He dug faster now, his movements urgent but controlled. A shoulder emerged, then an arm twisted at an unnatural angle. The fabric was rough wool torn and soaked through. Not dressed for this weather, not dressed for survival. Then he saw the collar. It encircled her throat like a brand, thick iron black with age and use, hinged at the back with a crude lock that had been forced open. The metal had rubbed her skin raw, leaving wounds that had frozen into ugly ridges of damaged flesh. Chain links still dangled from the collar's rings, snapped short but unmistakable in their purpose. This wasn't a burial. It was a disposal. Elias cleared the snow from her face and pressed 2 fingers against her throat, below the collar. For 5 long seconds he felt nothing but cold skin, and he started to pull back, started to accept what the mountain had already decided. Then he felt it. The faintest flutter of a pulse, barely there, barely trying. Hell, he muttered. He should leave her. Whatever had happened here, whoever had put that collar on her neck, it wasn't his problem. He'd survived 3 decades in these mountains by staying out of other people's wars, by keeping his head down and his business his own. But that pulse kept beating against his fingertips, stubborn and small. Damn it, he said, louder this time, the words swallowed by wind. He got his arms under her and lifted. She was lighter than she should have been, all angles and bones, the kind of thin that came from deprivation rather than nature. Blood had frozen her clothes to her skin in places, and the wounds he could see spoke of violence that went beyond simple cruelty. Someone had tried to kill her. Maybe thought they had. The mountain had other ideas. Elias turned northeast and started walking. The journey back to the cabin took twice as long as it should have. The woman remained unconscious, dead weight in his arms, her breathing so shallow he had to stop every few minutes to make sure she was still alive. The storm intensified, battering him with snow and wind that felt personal, like the mountain was testing his resolve. His arms burned, his legs shook, but he didn't stop. By the time his cabin emerged from the white chaos, full dark had fallen, and Elias was running on nothing but stubbornness. He kicked the door open and stumbled inside, the sudden absence of wind so shocking it made his ears ring. The cabin was a single room, 20 feet by 20, with a stone fireplace on the north wall and rough-hewn furniture he'd built himself. Simple, functional. His. He'd lived here so long it felt like an extension of his own body, every creak and draft familiar as his own breathing. He laid the woman on his bed, the only bed, and started building up the fire. The cabin was cold, but not frozen. He kept embers going even when he was out, a habit born of too many nights coming home to ice-locked doors. While the fire caught, he assessed his patient with a trapper's pragmatism. She needed to get warm, but too fast would kill her. Needed those frozen clothes off, needed her wounds cleaned, needed the collar. That damned iron collar. He grabbed his tools and knelt beside the bed. The lock had been broken, but the collar itself was still intact, still gripping her throat like a mechanical hand. The hinges were old but solid, designed to last, designed to be permanent, designed to never come off. Elias wedged a thin pry bar into the hinge and leveraged it slowly, carefully. The iron resisted, then gave with a crack that seemed too loud in the quiet cabin. The collar fell away in 2 pieces, revealing the full extent of the damage beneath. The skin of her throat was destroyed, raw grooves where the iron had rubbed for what must have been weeks, maybe months. Infection had started in places, angry red against pale skin. And there were other marks too, bruises in the shape of fingers, cuts that looked deliberate, the kind of casual violence that came from ownership rather than rage. Someone had done this to her, had kept doing it. "Who were you running from?" Elias asked the unconscious woman. She didn't answer, didn't move, just kept breathing those shallow, stubborn breaths. He spent the next hour working, got the frozen clothes cut away and replaced with wool blankets, cleaned the wounds he could reach with boiled water and what little medical supplies he kept, forced a few drops of water between her lips, built the fire higher. Then he sat in his chair by the hearth and waited. The storm raged outside. Inside, the cabin held steady against it, warm and dry and safe. Elias watched the woman's chest rise and fall, watched the color slowly return to her face, and wondered what kind of hell he'd just invited into his life. The answer came 3 hours later when she started screaming. The sound tore through the cabin like something feral, raw and primal and terrified. Elias was on his feet before he was fully awake, his hand reaching for the rifle he kept by the door. The woman was sitting up in bed, her eyes wild and unfocused, her hands clawing at her throat where the collar had been. The blankets had fallen away, and she was trying to stand, trying to run, her legs too weak to hold her. "Easy," Elias said, his voice low and calm. "You're safe." She didn't hear him, didn't see him. She was somewhere else, fighting something that existed only in her mind. A keening sound built in her chest, not quite words, not quite screaming. He approached slowly, hands visible, movements deliberate. "You're safe," he repeated. "Whatever happened, you're safe now." Her eyes found him, and for a moment she froze, her whole body going rigid. Then she launched herself at him with surprising strength, her fingers curled into claws, going for his eyes. Elias caught her wrists and held on, letting her momentum carry them both down. They hit the floor hard, him taking the brunt of it, her fighting like something possessed. She was trying to bite him, trying to knee him, making that keening sound that cut straight through his chest. "Stop!" he barked, using the command voice that had once moved soldiers. "I'm not going to hurt you." Something in his tone penetrated. She went still, panting, her eyes clearing enough to actually see him for the first time. They were gray, he noticed. Steel gray, like the winter sky. "You're in a cabin," he said, still holding her wrists but gently now. "In the mountains. I found you in the snow. You were dying." She stared at him, her breathing harsh and fast. Then her eyes moved past him, taking in the cabin, the fire, the storm visible through the single window. Her gaze caught on something, the iron collar lying in two pieces on the floor. All the fight went out of her at once. She sagged against him, and the sound she made then was worse than the screaming. It was a sob, deep and broken. The kind that came from somewhere beyond pain. Elias eased his grip and helped her sit up. She didn't resist, didn't fight, just sat there on his cabin floor, wrapped in a blanket, crying like the world was ending. He gave her space and time, went to the stove and made coffee, strong and bitter, the way he liked it, added some of his precious sugar, poured it into a tin cup, and brought it to her. "Drink," he said. She took the cup with shaking hands and sipped. Her eyes stayed on the collar. "Want me to throw it in the fire?" Elias asked. She nodded, still not speaking. He picked up the two pieces of iron and walked to the fireplace. The collar was heavier than it looked, solid and brutal in its simplicity. He held it over the flames for a moment, then dropped it in. The fire hissed and spat, the metal glowing orange before the heat started to warp it. When he turned back, she was watching him with those gray eyes, something like gratitude mixed with suspicion warring across her face. "I'm Elias," he said. "Elias Crow. This is my cabin. You're in the Montana Territory, about 40 miles from the nearest town. Storm's going to last another day at least. You're stuck here." She swallowed, winced at the pain in her throat, then spoke. Her voice was ruined, scraped raw, barely above a whisper. "Mara," she said. "My name is Mara Vance." "All right, Mara Vance. Now tell me who tried to kill you." She didn't answer right away. Took another sip of coffee, her hands steadier now, her eyes moving around the cabin like she was cataloging exits. "Smart, paranoid, but smart." "How long was I out there?" she asked instead. "Don't know. Found you maybe 4 hours ago. You were buried pretty deep, been unconscious since." "What day is it?" "February 7th, evening." Something flashed across her face, fear or relief. Elias couldn't tell which. 3 days, she murmured. "I've been running for 3 days." "Through this?" Elias gestured at the window where the storm showed no signs of letting up. "In that?" He pointed at the collar, now a molten lump in the fire. "You should be dead." "I was supposed to be." Mara set down the coffee cup and pulled the blanket tighter around herself. "They shot at me. Hit me twice, I think. I don't remember much after that. Just cold. So much cold." Elias studied her more carefully. Now that the immediate crisis had passed, he could see what he'd missed in the urgency of keeping her alive. She was young, maybe late 20s, with sharp features that spoke of intelligence and a jawline that suggested stubbornness, the kind of face that didn't forgive or forget easily. And underneath the blanket, he knew, were wounds that told a story of prolonged suffering. "Who's they, Getzam?" he asked. Mara's hands tightened on the blanket. "You don't want to know. Got a half-dead woman bleeding on my bed, and a storm outside that's going to keep us trapped together for at least a day. I'd say I've earned the story." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You want the story? Fine. But don't say I didn't warn you." She stood up slowly, her legs wobbling but holding, walked to the window and stared out at the storm, her reflection ghostly in the dark glass. "His name is Nathaniel Voss," she said, "and he owns people." The name meant nothing to Elias, but the way she said it, like speaking poison, told him everything he needed to know. "Not metaphorically," Mara continued, her voice flat. "Literally. He owns people, buys them, sells them, trades them, has contracts and ledgers and bills of sale, runs it like a business, like it's normal. Elias felt something cold settle in his gut. Slavery, he said. Slavery, she confirmed. Debt slavery, mostly. People who can't pay their way, who fall through the cracks, who have nowhere else to go. He offers them a deal. Work for him until the debt is cleared. Food, shelter, protection. Sounds reasonable, right? Let me guess, the debt never clears. The debt grows. Every meal, every night's shelter, it all goes on the ledger. Plus interest, plus administrative fees, plus penalties for any infraction, real or imagined. Within a month, you owe twice what you started with. Within a year, you're owned. She turned from the window to face him, and her eyes were hard now, all traces of tears gone. And if you try to run, he sends hunters, men like the ones who did this. She touched her throat where the collar had been. The collar is a mark, shows everyone you're owned, shows everyone what happens when you disobey. Elias stood and poured himself coffee, buying time to process what she was telling him. He'd heard rumors of operations like this, labor camps disguised as legitimate businesses, isolated territories where law didn't quite reach. But rumors were distant things, problems for other people in other places. This woman had brought it to his door. How long? He asked. 2 years, 23 months and 14 days, if you want to be precise. I counted every single one. And you escaped. I ran. Mara's laugh was bitter. There's a difference. Escape implies a plan, implies success. I just ran. Stole a horse, broke the collar lock with a rock, and rode until the horse died. Then I walked. Then I crawled. Then I woke up here. Elias sipped his coffee and studied her. Every part of her story rang true. The desperation, the wounds, the way she kept touching her throat like she couldn't quite believe the collar was gone. She was telling the truth, which meant the people hunting her were also real. They'll be looking for you, he said. They're always looking. Voss doesn't let people go. It's bad for business, he says, bad for morale. Every runaway who makes it represents potential loss of control, potential weakness. He sends hunters after everyone who runs, no matter how far they get. Even in this storm? Especially in this storm. They'll wait it out and then pick up my trail. They're good at this, Elias. Really good. They've done it before. Elias walked to the window and looked out at the white chaos beyond. The storm was in full fury now, the kind that could last days. But storms always ended, and when this one did, tracking a wounded woman through fresh snow would be child's play for anyone with experience. How many? He asked. Hunters? At least 4. Maybe more. Armed? Rifles, pistols, knives, whatever they need. Voss pays well and he doesn't care about methods, just results. Elias nodded slowly, his mind already working through scenarios. 4 armed men tracking a fugitive to an isolated cabin. The strategic thinking from his past life, the one he'd tried to leave behind, started clicking into place like gears in a well-oiled machine. You should leave, Mara said quietly. When the storm breaks, you should ride out. Leave me here if you want, or point me in a direction and I'll go. But you should get away from this. From me. And go where? Anywhere. Town, another cabin, doesn't matter. Just somewhere that's not here when they arrive. Elias turned from the window and met her eyes. This is my home. This is a target now. Still my home. Something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe, or confusion, like the concept of someone standing their ground was foreign to her. They'll burn it, she said. They'll burn it, and they'll kill you, and they'll take me back. That's what they do. They can try. The words came out harder than Elias intended, carrying weight from a past he rarely thought about anymore. Mara heard it too, her eyes narrowing slightly as she reassessed him. You were a soldier, she said. Not a question. A long time ago. Which war? The kind that doesn't end. Mara studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right, but I need you to understand something. These men, Voss's hunters, they're not soldiers. They're predators. They enjoy this, and they will not stop. Neither will I, Elias said. The storm broke on the 3rd day. Elias woke before dawn to silence, the kind of profound quiet that came after days of wind and fury when the world exhaled and went still. He rose carefully, not wanting to wake Mara, who'd finally managed to sleep through the night without screaming. Outside, the world had been remade. Snow had drifted higher than the cabin's windows in places, creating strange sculptures of white that caught the pre-dawn light. The sky above was clear and cold, stars fading as the eastern horizon began to glow, beautiful and treacherous in equal measure. That was the mountain's way. He started coffee and began the process of digging out, clearing the door, establishing a path to the woodpile, checking his traps and supplies. The physical work felt good after days of confinement, his body remembering rhythms that had become second nature over the years. Behind him, he heard Mara stirring. She'd been getting stronger each day, her wounds healing faster than he'd expected. Yesterday, she'd been able to walk around the cabin without support, and this morning she met him at the door fully dressed in clothes he'd cobbled together from his own supplies. "Storm's over," she said. "Yes." "They'll come today." "Probably." She accepted this with a nod. No fear in her expression, just grim acceptance. "What do you want to do?" Elias leaned on his shovel and looked out at the pristine snowscape. In town, men would be digging out, assessing damage, going about the business of surviving winter. Up here, the only business that mattered was staying alive. And lately, that had gotten complicated. "Tell me about the ledger," he said. Mara went very still. "What ledger?" "The one you're not mentioning. The one that explains why a man would send 4 hunters into a mountain blizzard instead of cutting his losses. You didn't just run, Mara. You took something." For a moment he thought she'd deny it. Then her shoulders sagged slightly, and she reached into her shirt, pulling out an oilcloth package no bigger than her hand. "I took this," she said, handing it to him. Elias unwrapped the package carefully. Inside was a small leather-bound book, its pages covered in cramped handwriting and columns of numbers. Names, dates, amounts, transactions, ownership records. "Voss's ledger," Mara said. "Every person he owns, every deal he's made, every debt he's enforced. 2 years of records. Names of people who helped him, people who looked the other way, people who profited. All of it." Elias flipped through the pages, his stomach turning at what he saw. Dozens of names, hundreds of transactions. A business built on human misery, documented with the same casual precision someone might use to track livestock. "This could destroy him," he said. "That's the idea. And you kept it hidden this whole time, even when you were dying. Especially when I was dying. If I was going to die anyway, at least I'd die knowing he couldn't get this back. That maybe, someday, someone would find it and use it." Elias closed the ledger and rewrapped it carefully, handed it back to her. "This changes things." "How?" "This means they're not just coming to take you back. They're coming to make sure this never sees daylight. That's a different kind of desperate." Mara tucked the ledger back into her shirt. "Does that change your mind? About staying?" Elias considered the question. The smart answer was yes. Take the ledger, ride for town, turn it over to whatever passed for law in these parts and let them handle it. Get as far from this mess as possible. But smart answers didn't account for the look in Mara's eyes when she talked about the collar, didn't account for the way she still flinched when doors opened too fast, didn't account for 2 years of suffering documented in that small leather book. And they definitely didn't account for the fact that he'd carried her out of that snowdrift, had saved her life, had made her his responsibility whether he meant to or not. "No," he said finally. "Doesn't change my mind." "You're an idiot." "Probably." Mara laughed, a real laugh this time, with actual humor in it. "All right then, idiot. What's the plan?" Elias looked around his clearing, his cabin, the landscape he knew better than any map. He'd spent 30 years learning every rock and tree, every approach and escape route, every place where the mountain would kill you if you weren't careful. Time to use that knowledge. "We turn this into a trap," he said, "and we make them regret coming here." That's it. They spent the morning preparing. Elias had survived this long by being prepared for anything, and his cabin reflected that philosophy. In addition to his trapping supplies and basic necessities, he had weapons, a Spencer repeating rifle, 2 Colt revolvers, a shotgun, and enough ammunition to hold off a small army. Military habits died hard. But weapons alone wouldn't be enough. 4 men coming up a mountain had the advantage of numbers. They needed to even those odds. They'll approach from the south, Elias said, sketching a crude map in the dirt floor. It's the easiest route up, and they'll assume we don't know they're coming. They'll try to surround the cabin, probably wait until dark to make their move. Mara studied the map. What if they don't wait? Then we adapt. But these men are hunters, right? They know patience. They'll want to be sure. So we give them something to be sure about. Exactly. Elias laid out the plan. It was simple, which meant it had a chance of working. They'd make the cabin look occupied but vulnerable. Smoke from the chimney. A figure moving past the windows. Signs of normal activity. Meanwhile, they'd prepare positions outside, in the tree line, where they could see anyone approaching. When the hunters came, they'd find an empty cabin and 2 very prepared defenders. There's a problem, Mara said when he finished. I've never fired a gun before. Elias blinked. Never? Never had the chance. Voss didn't exactly encourage his property to learn self-defense. That complicated things. Giving someone a weapon they didn't know how to use was often more dangerous than no weapon at all, but leaving her defenseless wasn't an option either. All right, he said. Quick lesson then. They went outside into the clear, cold morning, and Elias gave her a crash course in firearms. Started with the basics: how to hold, how to aim, how to account for recoil. Gave her one of the Colts and had her practice drawing it, getting comfortable with the weight. She was a fast learner. After an hour of practice, she could hit a tree trunk from 20 feet more often than not. Not great, but better than nothing. Remember, Elias told her, in a fight, accuracy matters less than you think. Most shooting happens fast and close. Point, pull the trigger, move. Don't try to be fancy. Mara nodded, her expression serious. Point, pull, move, got it. They spent the afternoon setting up their defensive positions. Elias chose 2 spots in the tree line with good sight lines and clear escape routes. Cleared away snow, established firing positions, stockpiled ammunition within easy reach. It was almost like being back in the war, preparing defensive positions with limited resources and unlimited stakes. Almost, but not quite. Back then, he'd had orders and objectives. Now he just had a stubborn desire to not let evil men win. As the sun started to sink toward the western peaks, Elias made a final check of the cabin. They'd left a fire burning, positioned some of his old clothes to look like someone was sleeping in the bed, and left the door unbarred. An invitation that would look like carelessness. Mara joined him at the cabin door, the Colt holstered at her hip, her expression unreadable. You don't have to do this, she said quietly. It's not too late to run. Yes, it is, Elias replied. The moment I pulled you out of that snow, it was too late. This is happening, Mara. Might as well face it on our terms. She nodded slowly. Thank you. For everything. If this goes bad, it won't. But if it does, I want you to know that, Mara. Elias met her eyes. It won't go bad. We're going to win this. Then we're going to figure out what to do with that ledger. Then we're going to make sure Nathaniel Voss never owns another person again. That's how this ends. For the first time since he'd found her, Mara smiled. Really smiled. Not the bitter expression she'd worn before. All right, she said. Let's kill some hunters. They moved into position as the sun touched the horizon, settling into their respective hiding spots with the practiced silence of predators. Elias had given Mara the closer position, where she'd have a shorter shot and better cover. He took the one farther out, where he could see the approach and provide covering fire. Then they waited. The temperature dropped with the sun, that brutal mountain cold that turned breath to frost and made metal burn to touch. Elias ignored it, his body remembering the discipline of a soldier on watch. Beside him, the Spencer rifle lay ready, loaded and waiting. Hours passed. The moon rose, bright and cold, turning the snow to silver. Nothing moved in the clearing except wind-stirred branches and the occasional drift of powder from overladen pine boughs. Maybe they wouldn't come tonight. Maybe the storm had delayed them more than expected. Maybe... Movement. South side of the clearing, just visible between the trees. Elias tensed, his hand moving to the rifle. Watched as the movement resolved into a shape, then another shape, then 4 shapes, total. Men, moving in a spread formation, approaching the cabin with the confidence of professionals. They were good. Moved quietly, used cover well, communicated with hand signals rather than voices. These weren't amateurs or thugs. These were men who'd done this before, who'd hunted people through difficult terrain and brought them back. Or brought back proof they were dead. The lead hunter raised a fist and the group stopped, maybe 60 yards from the cabin. They held position there, watching, assessing. Elias could almost hear their thoughts, smoke from the chimney, no obvious movement, but something felt wrong. Were they expected? After 5 minutes, the lead hunter made another signal and the group split. 2 headed for the cabin's front, 2 circled around back. Smart. Cover all exits, go in simultaneously, minimize chance of escape. Elias waited until they were all committed, all moving toward the cabin. Then he raised the Spencer, sighted on the lead hunter's back, and fired. The shot cracked through the night like breaking ice, impossibly loud after hours of silence. The lead hunter dropped, his cry of pain swallowed by the second shot as Elias worked the Spencer's lever and fired again. The clearing exploded into chaos. The hunters scattered, diving for cover, their rifles coming up as they tried to locate the shooter. Mara opened fire from her position, her shots wild but effective, forcing the 2 hunters on the south side to abandon their approach and take defensive positions. Elias kept firing, methodical and precise, each shot aimed to pin down or eliminate. He hit another hunter, saw him fall behind a snowdrift. The remaining 2 managed to get behind the cabin itself, using it for cover as they tried to assess the situation. "How many?" one of them shouted, his voice carrying across the clearing. No answer, just the echo of gunfire and the sharp smell of powder smoke. Elias reloaded quickly, his hands steady despite the adrenaline. 4 hunters, 2 down, 2 pinned. Better odds than they'd started with. But those 2 remaining were dangerous now, wounded animals backed into a corner. He signaled to Mara, "Stay down, stay quiet. Let the hunters make the next move." For 30 seconds, nothing happened. Then a voice called out from behind the cabin, loud and carrying. "Mara Vance, we know you're here. Mr. Voss just wants his property back. You come out now and the man helping you gets to live." Silence. The wind stirred snow across the clearing. "I'll give you to the count of 10, the voice continued. "Then we burn this whole place down and take what's left." Elias saw Mara shift in her position, saw her start to rise, and he knew what she was thinking. That voice was offering her a choice: sacrifice herself or let him die protecting her. He made a bird call, low and quick, the signal they'd agreed on for "stay down." She hesitated, then settled back into cover. The hunter started counting. 1. Elias moved, leaving his position and circling wide through the trees. 2. The hunters were focused on the cabin, on Mara's position, expecting her to break cover. 3. Elias reached a new angle, where he could see the corner of the cabin. 4. One hunter visible now, crouched behind the water barrel, rifle ready. 5. Elias raised the Spencer. 6. Sighted carefully. 7. The hunter's head turned slightly, sensing something. 8. Elias fired. The hunter dropped without a sound, and the counting stopped. The second hunter, the one who'd been calling out, spun toward Elias's position, his rifle coming up fast. But Mara was faster. She stepped out of cover and fired 3 times, the shots close together, each one finding its target. The hunter stumbled backward, hitting the cabin wall, then slid down into the snow. Silence returned to the clearing, broken only by harsh breathing and the ringing aftermath of gunfire. Elias waited a full minute, watching for any movement, any sign that he'd miscounted. But there was nothing. 4 hunters, 4 bodies. The math was complete. He stood slowly and walked into the clearing. Mara emerged from her position at the same time, the Colt still in her hand, her face pale but determined. They met in front of the cabin, stepping around bodies, neither speaking until they'd checked each hunter to confirm they were dead. "You okay?" Elias asked. Mara nodded. "You?" "Fine." They stood there in the moonlight, surrounded by the aftermath of violence, and something passed between them. Not quite trust, too soon for that, but recognition. They'd fought together and survived. That meant something. "This won't end it," Mara said finally. "Voss will send more." "I know. We can't stay here." "I know that too." Mara looked at the cabin, at the home Elias had built over 3 decades, and something like guilt crossed her face. "I'm sorry. I brought this to your door." "You brought a choice," Elias corrected. I made it. Now we deal with what comes next. Which is? Elias walked to the nearest body and started going through pockets. Found money, ammunition, a letter of credit from a bank in a town called Silver Ridge, and in the lead hunter's coat, a map with several locations marked, including this cabin. We take the fight to them, he said, holding up the map. This shows where they're based. We go there, we use that ledger, and we end this properly. Mara stared at the map, then at Elias, and slowly started to smile. You really are an idiot. Maybe. But I'm an idiot with a plan and nothing to lose. What about the cabin? Elias looked at his home, at the place he'd spent 30 years building and defending. It was just wood and stone. Important, but not irreplaceable. The cabin's not going anywhere, he said, and neither is the mountain. They'll be here when we get back. And if we don't get back? Then at least we went down fighting. Mara considered this, then nodded. All right. When do we leave? Tomorrow. First light. Give us time to rest and prepare. They spent the next hour cleaning up, dragging bodies away from the cabin, gathering any useful supplies the hunters had brought, securing the perimeter. Grim work, but necessary. By the time they finished, exhaustion had settled into Elias's bones. Combat did that, burned through energy like fire through tinder. He was too old for this, his body reminded him. Too old and too tired and too alone. Except he wasn't alone anymore. He looked over at Mara, who was checking the loads in the hunters' rifles with practiced efficiency. She moved differently now, still cautious, still wary, but with purpose, like she'd found something worth fighting for beyond simple survival. Maybe they both had. Get some rest, Elias said. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. Mara nodded and headed for the cabin. Paused at the door and looked back. Elias? Thank you. For not running. Wouldn't know where to go, he replied. This mountain's the only home I've got. Not the only one anymore, she said quietly, and went inside. Elias stood alone in the clearing, surrounded by snow and stars and the vast, indifferent silence of the mountain. Tomorrow they'd ride into danger with nothing but rage and a small leather ledger to protect them. The odds were terrible. The stakes were absolute. And for the first time in 30 years, Elias Crow felt truly alive. He took one last look at the peaceful clearing, committed it to memory, then followed Mara inside. They had a war to plan, and the mountain didn't wait for anyone, not even those who called it home. Dawn came cold and unforgiving, the kind of mountain morning that felt like broken glass in your lungs. Elias was already awake, had been for hours, his body refusing sleep after the violence of the previous night. He stood at the window watching the sky shift from black to gray to pale blue, each shade revealing more of the blood-stained snow in the clearing. 4 bodies. 4 men who'd come hunting and found something they weren't prepared for. Behind him, Mara stirred on the bed, sitting up slowly. She looked better than she had 3 days ago. The color had returned to her face. The wounds were healing, but there were shadows under her eyes that spoke of dreams he didn't want to know about. You didn't sleep, she said. Didn't need to. Liar. Elias turned from the window and started making coffee, the familiar ritual grounding him. We need to leave within the hour. Storm's clear, but another one's coming, maybe 2 days out. I can feel it. Mara rose and began gathering supplies, moving with the efficiency of someone who'd learned to pack fast and travel light. How far to Silver Ridge? 2 days hard ride if the weather holds. 3 if it doesn't. And you think that's where Voss is? Elias pulled out the map they'd taken from the hunters, spreading it across the rough table. Silver Ridge was marked with a star, and several other locations were circled, way stations, he guessed, or safe houses. The whole territory was connected like a spider's web, with Silver Ridge at the center. It's where the money is, he said, pointing to the letter of credit they'd found. Bank draft from Silver Ridge Territorial Bank, signed by someone named Garrett. If Voss is running an operation this big, he needs money flowing through somewhere legitimate. This is it. Mara studied the map, her finger tracing the route. We ride in with the ledger, what then? Walk into the sheriff's office and expect justice? No. I expect the sheriff's probably on Voss's payroll, same as everyone else with power in that town. But we don't need the law. We need leverage. What kind of leverage? Elias tapped the ledger, still wrapped in its oilcloth. This book has names, important names, people who've helped Voss, People who've looked away, people who've profited. If we can get it to the right person, someone with reach beyond Silver Ridge, we can burn his whole operation down. And who's the right person? Don't know yet. We'll figure it out when we get there. Mara laughed, but there was an edge to it. That's a terrible plan. You have a better one? No. She folded the map and tucked it into her coat. But at least I'm honest about how terrible it is. They finished preparing in silence, loading saddlebags with food and ammunition, securing weapons, making sure nothing would slow them down. Elias took one last look around the cabin, memorizing details. The chair he'd carved from pine, the table scarred with years of use, the fireplace that had kept him warm through 3 decades of winters. Home. Such a simple word for something so hard to leave. Ready? Mara stood in the doorway, backlit by morning sun, looking nothing like the broken woman he'd pulled from the snow. Ready, Elias said, and closed the door behind him. They rode south, following game trails Elias knew by heart, pushing the horses hard through terrain that would have killed most travelers. The bodies in the clearing grew small behind them, then disappeared entirely as the forest swallowed the cabin from view. The mountain had given him sanctuary for 30 years. Now it was letting him go. The first day passed in focused silence, both of them watching the tree line for signs of pursuit. But the forest remained empty except for the usual wildlife, deer watching from safe distances, an eagle circling overhead, the occasional fox track in the snow. If more hunters were coming, they hadn't arrived yet. By late afternoon, they'd descended below the tree line into rolling hills dotted with scrub pine and granite outcrops. The temperature rose a few degrees, enough that the snow began to soften and their horses' hooves threw up slush instead of powder. Elias called a halt near a frozen creek where they could water the horses and rest without being visible from a distance. While Mara tended the animals, he climbed a nearby rock formation and scanned the back trail through his field glasses. Nothing. Just empty landscape stretching back toward mountains that looked impossibly distant already. See anything? Mara called up. No, you? Just a lot of nothing. Elias climbed down and joined her by the creek. She'd broken through the ice and was letting the horses drink, her hands red from the cold water. Tell me about Silver Ridge, she said without looking up. What kind of town is it? Haven't been there in years. Used to be a silver mining town, hence the name, but the silver played out before the war. Last I heard it was hanging on through ranching and lumber. Maybe 500 people. Big enough to hide an operation like Voss's? Big enough that nobody asks questions they don't want answered. Small enough that everyone knows everyone's business. Dangerous combination. Mara nodded, still watching the horses. The people in that ledger, I know some of them, saw them visit Voss's compound. They weren't just enablers, Elias, they were buyers. Something in her voice made Elias look at her more carefully. Buyers? Rich men from back east, mostly, coming out to the territory for investments. That's what Voss called it. They'd tour the facilities, inspect the workers like livestock, make their selections, pay for exclusive contracts. You mean they bought people? I mean, they bought labor, bought access, bought whatever they wanted and called it business. Her hands tightened on the reins. One of them, a banker named Garrett, same name on that letter of credit. He came 3 times while I was there. Always left with paperwork, always left smiling. Elias felt cold settle in his chest that had nothing to do with the weather. This Garrett, he's in Silver Ridge? He runs Silver Ridge, owns the bank, owns half the land, owns the men who claim to enforce law. If you're looking for Voss's partner, that's him. Then we need to be very careful how we approach this. Careful? Mara finally looked at him, her gray eyes hard. They own the town, Elias. There's no careful approach. There's just walking into the lion's den and hoping we're faster than the teeth. You want revenge. I want justice. Not the same thing. Close enough? Elias studied her face, seeing the anger there, the barely controlled fury that had probably kept her alive through 2 years of hell. Anger was useful. Anger could drive you forward when everything else failed. But anger without discipline got you killed. Listen to me, he said quietly. I understand what you want. I understand why. But if we ride into Silver Ridge looking for a fight, we'll get one, and we'll lose. These men have resources, have numbers, have home advantage. We need to be smarter. Smart like what? Smart like we use that ledger as a weapon. not a confession. We don't go to the law. We go around it. Find someone else with power, someone who'd benefit from Voss and Garrett going down. Make them an ally. Mara was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right. And if we can't find an ally, then we burn everything to the ground and run. Now that, Mara said, sounds like a plan I can work with. They rode into the gathering darkness, pushing for another few miles before making camp in a dense stand of pine where the fire would be hidden from distant observation. Elias built it small and hot, enough to warm food and dry their clothes, but not enough to create a beacon. While they ate, salt pork and hardtack washed down with creek water, Mara pulled out the ledger and began reading through it by firelight, her expression growing darker with each page. There are children in here, she said finally. Whole families. People who came west looking for opportunity and got trapped instead. How many total? 237 names. That's just the current inventory. There are sections for completed contracts and inventory losses, like people or products that depreciate. Elias took the ledger and flipped to one of the completed contract pages. Each entry had a name, a start date, an end date, and a final disposition. Most were marked released, debt satisfied, but a disturbing number said ceased or escaped, terminated. He's been doing this for years, Elias said. At least 5 that I can tell from the dates. Probably longer. Mara pulled her coat tighter against the cold. The question is how many people know and just don't care? In a place like Silver Ridge? Most of them probably. But knowing and caring are different things. We find the right pressure point, the right person who'd rather see Voss gone than protected. We might have a chance. You keep saying we, Mara said quietly. You know you don't owe me this, right? You saved my life. You fought off the hunters. You've done more than anyone could ask. If you want to leave me at the edge of town and ride back to your mountain, I'd understand. Elias looked at her across the fire. This woman who'd survived 2 years of slavery and still had the courage to fight back. And something shifted in his chest. He'd spent 30 years alone because it was easier, safer, less complicated. But easy and safe hadn't made him happy. Hadn't made him feel anything at all except the slow passage of seasons. I'm seeing this through, he said. Not because I owe you, because it's the right thing to do. You don't strike me as someone who cares much about right and wrong. I didn't. For a long time I didn't. But then I pulled you out of that snow and everything changed. Can't explain it better than that. Mara smiled, and for a moment she looked years younger, the weight of trauma lifting just enough to show the person underneath. You're a strange man, Elias Crow. Been called worse. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn down to coals. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called out, hunting. The sound reminded Elias of the mountain, of nights spent alone with nothing but wildlife for company. He didn't miss it as much as he thought he would. Get some sleep, he told Mara. I'll take first watch. She didn't argue, just rolled herself into her blanket and closed her eyes. Within minutes, her breathing had deepened into sleep, though he noticed she kept one hand on the Colt at her hip. Smart. Trust, but verify. The mountain had taught him that too. Elias settled in for a long night, his rifle across his knees, his eyes scanning the darkness for threats that never came. The stars wheeled overhead in their eternal patterns, indifferent to human struggles. He'd always found that comforting before, the idea that nothing he did really mattered in the cosmic scale of things. Now, it just felt lonely. The second day brought them within sight of Silver Ridge just as the sun reached its apex. The town sprawled in a valley between 2 ridges, larger than Elias remembered, with new buildings spreading out from the original core like a stain. Smoke rose from dozens of chimneys, and even from a distance he could hear the sound of industry, hammers and saws, voices calling out, the general chaos of civilization. He'd forgotten how loud people were. That's it? Mara asked, pulling her horse alongside his. That's it. Silver Ridge, where dreams go to die and opportunists go to profit. You really don't like towns, do you? Towns are fine. It's the people in them I have problems with. They dismounted and led their horses into a copse of trees where they could observe without being seen. From this vantage point, Elias could make out the main street, the bank building that dominated the eastern side, new construction, built from brick rather than wood, and what looked like a hotel or saloon near the center. The bank, Mara said, pointing. That's Garrett's. I recognize it from descriptions. He had architectural drawings in Voss's compound, bragging about his empire. Big bank for a small town. Not when you're laundering money through it. Voss told me once that Garrett had connections back east, legitimate business interests that made the slavery operation look clean by comparison. The bank is where the dirty money becomes respectable. Elias studied the building through his field glasses. 3 stories, heavily built, with barred windows on the ground floor. Not a place you could just walk into and make demands. They'd need a different approach. What about Voss himself? He asked. He in town? Don't know. His main compound is north of here, maybe 20 miles, but he traveled a lot. Could be anywhere. Then we start with Garrett. Find out what he knows, what he's willing to do to protect himself. Use the ledger to make him an offer he can't refuse. What kind of offer? The kind where he gives up Voss to save himself. Rich men always save themselves first. Mara considered this, then nodded. And if he doesn't take the offer? Then we move to plan B. Which is? Make sure everyone in that town knows what's in this ledger. Burn the secrets, see who runs. They waited until dusk before entering town, riding in from the west when the streets were busy with end-of-day activity. Nobody gave them more than a passing glance. 2 more travelers in a town that saw dozens every week. Nothing special, nothing memorable. Elias had chosen a stable on the edge of town, run by an old Chinese man who took their money without questions and promised the horses would be ready if they needed to leave quickly. The man's eyes were shrewd and knowing, and Elias suspected he'd seen enough trouble to recognize it when it walked through his door. "How long you staying?" the man asked in accented but clear English. "Don't know yet." "Advice? Don't stay long. Town's got sickness." "What kind of sickness?" "The kind that comes with money and power. Makes men forget their souls." The old man patted one of the horses. "I keep these ready for fast riding. You need them. You come get them. No questions." "Appreciate it," Elias said, paying him extra. They made their way through the streets toward the hotel Mara had pointed out earlier. The town was prosperous in that aggressive frontier way. New buildings next to old, wealth displayed without subtlety, the kind of place that had grown too fast and didn't quite know what it wanted to be yet. The hotel was called the Territorial Grand, which was pretentious for what amounted to a 2-story wooden building with a restaurant on the ground floor. But it was clean, and the clerk barely looked at them before taking Elias's money and handing over a key. Room 6, top floor, overlooks the street. Dinner's served until 9, breakfast starts at 6. Need anything else? "Information," Elias said. "Looking for a man named Garrett. Runs the bank, I'm told." The clerk's expression shifted, became guarded. "Mr. Garrett's an important man. Has an office in the bank building, usually there during business hours. Can I ask what this is regarding?" "Business opportunity. Heard he's interested in investments." "I see. Well, you can try the bank tomorrow, but Mr. Garrett doesn't meet with just anyone. You'll need an appointment." "We'll take our chances," Mara said, her voice flat. They climbed the stairs to their room, which was exactly as advertised, small, clean, with a window overlooking the main street. Elias wedged the door shut with a chair and checked the window locks while Mara collapsed on one of the 2 narrow beds. "Tomorrow then," she said. "We walk into the bank and confront him." "Not exactly. Too public, too many witnesses. We need to get him alone, somewhere he can't call for help." "How?" Elias moved to the window and looked out at the town below. People moved through the streets with purpose, heading home or to dinner or to whatever entertainment Silver Ridge offered. Normal life continuing on while darkness operated underneath. "We wait until he leaves the bank," Elias said. "Follow him home. Make our offer in private, where he has to actually listen. And if he refuses? Then we make sure the ledger gets published. There's got to be a newspaper here or a telegraph office. We send copies to every major paper between here and Washington. Burn everything down and let the pieces fall where they will." Mara sat up, her expression thoughtful. "You've done this before. Not this exactly, but something like it. The planning, the strategy. This isn't your first time." "It's not." "The war you mentioned. What did you do?" Elias was quiet for a long moment, debating how much to share. He'd spent 30 years not talking about the war, not thinking about it, trying to bury those memories under snow and silence. But Mara had shared her story. Seemed only fair to share some of his. I was a sergeant, he said finally. Infantry, mostly. Spent 4 years fighting a war that didn't make sense for reasons nobody could quite explain. Lost a lot of good men. Lost pieces of myself. When it ended, I walked away and never looked back. Until now. Until now. What changed? Elias turned from the window to face her. You did. Pulling you out of that snow, hearing your story, seeing what men like Voss do to people, it reminded me that some things are worth fighting for. Some evils need to be stopped, even if the cost is high. That's a hell of a burden to carry. Yes, it is, but I've carried worse. They ate dinner in the hotel restaurant, keeping their conversation quiet and their attention on the other patrons. The room was half full with locals and travelers. The atmosphere convivial enough, but with an undercurrent of tension Elias couldn't quite place. People laughed too loud, drank too fast, like they were trying to forget something. Near the end of the meal, a man entered the restaurant who made the whole room shift. Conversations didn't stop, but they quieted. People's postures changed, became more careful. The man himself was unremarkable, middle-aged, well-dressed, carrying himself with the confidence of someone used to deference. That's him, Mara whispered. Garrett. I recognize him. Elias studied the banker as he made his way through the restaurant, shaking hands, sharing quiet words, playing the role of community pillar. Everything about him screamed respectability, from his tailored suit to his groomed beard to the way he smiled like he genuinely cared about the people he was greeting. It was a masterful performance. Garrett took a table in the corner and ordered dinner, pulling out a newspaper to read while he waited. He looked like a man without a care in the world, certainly not like someone who profited from human slavery. We follow him when he leaves, Elias murmured. See where he goes. They finished their meal slowly, paying their bill just as Garrett was settling his own. When he rose and headed for the door, they waited 30 seconds, then followed at a discreet distance. The streets were darker now, lit by occasional oil lamps and the spill of light from windows. Garrett walked with purpose, heading east toward the newer part of town where the houses were larger and set back from the road. A residential area for people with money and position. Elias and Mara kept to the shadows, moving parallel to Garrett's route rather than directly behind him. The banker never looked back, never showed any sign he suspected surveillance. Why would he? This was his town, his territory. He was safe here, or thought he was. Garrett's house sat at the end of a tree-lined street, a 2-story affair with a wraparound porch and manicured grounds. Expensive, ostentatious, the kind of house that declared its owner's status to anyone who saw it. They watched from across the street as Garrett climbed the steps and entered through the front door. Lights came on inside, first floor, then second floor, as he made his way through the house. Now what? Mara asked. Now we wait a bit longer, let him settle in, get comfortable. Then we knock on his door and have a conversation. Just knock on the door? That's the plan? Sometimes simple is best. He's not expecting trouble at home. We surprise him before he can react, get him listening before he can call for help. They gave it 20 minutes, watching the house for signs of other occupants. But no one else appeared, no servants or family members. Garrett seemed to live alone, which made sense for a man with secrets to protect. At the 20-minute mark, Elias nodded to Mara and they crossed the street. The porch steps were solid under his boots, recently painted and well-maintained. Everything about this house spoke of wealth and care, the kind of prosperity built on other people's suffering. Elias knocked firmly on the door. Footsteps approached from inside, and the door opened to reveal Garrett, his jacket removed but still looking composed. His expression shifted from polite inquiry to confusion when he saw them. 2 strangers, armed, standing on his porch after dark. "Can I help you?" he asked, his hand moving toward his coat pocket. "Don't," Elias said quietly, his own hand resting on his holstered revolver. "We're here to talk, nothing more. But if you go for whatever's in that pocket, this conversation ends badly." Garrett's hand froze and his eyes narrowed. "Who are you?" "People with information you need to hear. Can we come inside? Or would you prefer to have this discussion where your neighbors might overhear?" For a long moment Garrett didn't move, clearly weighing his options. Then he stepped back and gestured them inside. 5 minutes. Then I'm calling the sheriff." 5 minutes is all we need, Mara said, walking past him into the house. The interior matched the exterior. Expensive furniture, fine carpets, artwork on the walls. Everything carefully chosen to project success and respectability. Garrett led them to a study lined with bookshelves, closing the door behind them. "Well?" he said, crossing his arms. "What's this about?" Mara pulled out the ledger and dropped it on his desk with a heavy thud. "This. Your business with Nathaniel Voss, your investments in human misery." Garrett's face went white, and Elias knew they had him. The color drained from Garrett's face so completely that for a moment Elias thought the man might collapse. His eyes fixed on the ledger like it was a coiled rattlesnake on his desk, his mouth opening and closing without sound. "I don't know what you're talking about," he finally managed, but his voice cracked on the words. "Yes, you do," Mara said, stepping closer. "You know exactly what this is. Your name is in there 47 times. Transfers, payments, contracts. You've been financing Voss's operation for years." Garrett's hand moved toward the desk drawer, and Elias's pistol cleared leather before the banker's fingers reached the handle. "I wouldn't," Elias said softly. "Whatever's in that drawer won't save you. Nothing will, unless you listen very carefully to what we're about to offer." The banker's hand retreated slowly, and he sank into his chair like a man twice his age. For several seconds, he just stared at the ledger, his breathing harsh in the quiet study. When he finally looked up, something had shifted in his expression, calculation replacing the initial panic. "Who are you?" he asked again, this time with more control. "And what do you want?" "I'm someone who escaped," Mara said. 2 years wearing an iron collar, working Voss's compound while men like you profited from my labor. This ledger? I stole it when I ran. It's the only copy. And I'm someone who made the mistake of helping her," Elias added. "Now we're both wanted, both hunted, and both very motivated to see this entire operation burn to the ground." Garrett leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepling in front of his face. The fear was still there, but now it was competing with the instinct that had probably made him successful, the ability to find advantage in any situation. "So this is blackmail," he said. "This is an opportunity," Elias corrected. "We give you a chance to save yourself before everything collapses. And it will collapse, Mr. Garrett, one way or another." "How?" Mara picked up the ledger and flipped it open to a marked page. "Tomorrow morning, copies of this go to newspapers in Denver, San Francisco, and Washington. Telegraph offices will spread the story within hours. Every name in here, including yours, becomes public knowledge. Your bank, your reputation, your life as you know it ends. Unless," Elias continued, "you help us first." Garrett's eyes narrowed. "Help you how?" "Voss, where is he?" "I don't lie," Mara snapped. "You're partners. You know where he is." The banker was quiet for a long moment, his eyes moving between them, weighing odds and outcomes with a merchant's precision. Finally, he stood and walked to a cabinet, pulling out a bottle of whiskey and 3 glasses. He poured without asking, his hands steadier now. "You have to understand," he said, offering them drinks they didn't take. "This started as legitimate business, labor contracts, mining operations, perfectly legal arrangements." "When did it stop being legal?" Elias asked. Garrett drank deeply before answering. "Probably from the beginning, if I'm honest. Voss had a way of making things sound reasonable, sound necessary. The territory was growing," he said. "We needed workers, and they needed opportunities. Everyone benefits." That's what he told the investors. "The investors," Mara repeated. "How many?" "Dozens, maybe more. Men back east who wanted Western exposure without Western risks. Voss provided that. Guaranteed returns, minimal oversight, clean paperwork. The bank made it all look legitimate." "And you got rich," Elias said. "I got comfortable." Garrett finished his drink and poured another. "Comfortable enough not to ask questions I didn't want answered. Comfortable enough to ignore what was really happening." "People dying," Mara said, her voice tight. "People being worked to death, beaten, sold like livestock. That's what you ignored." Garrett flinched but didn't argue. "I told myself I didn't know, that I was just moving money, just providing financial services. But I knew, deep down, I always knew." "Then help us stop it," Elias said. "Tell us where Voss is. Help us end this, and maybe you walk away with something left." The banker set down his glass and moved to the window, staring out at his manicured grounds. When he spoke again, his voice was tired. Voss is at the main compound, 20 miles north. He's preparing for something, I don't know what. Hired more guards, brought in supplies, acting like he's expecting trouble. He sent 4 hunters after us 3 days ago, Mara said. They didn't come back. He knows we're coming. Then you're walking into a trap. Probably, Elias agreed. But we're walking into it with this. He tapped the ledger. And with your help, we can make sure he can't hide behind money and influence anymore. Garrett turned from the window, and something like desperation crossed his face. What exactly do you want from me? Testimony, Mara said. Written statement of everything you know about Voss's operation. Names, dates, financial records from the bank. Everything that proves this wasn't just one man's crime. It was a conspiracy. That would destroy me. Yes, Elias said bluntly. But it's the only way you don't end up in a noose beside Voss when this all comes out. You cooperate now, you might survive with prison time. You fight us, you hang with the rest of them. The banker walked back to his desk and sat heavily, his face gray in the lamplight. You're asking me to betray every business partner I have, to destroy relationships built over decades. We're asking you to do the right thing for once in your miserable life, Mara said, leaning forward. Those relationships were built on human suffering. Every dollar you made came from someone's pain. You want redemption? Start by telling the truth. Garrett looked at her, really looked at her, seeing perhaps for the first time the real cost of his comfortable ignorance. You were there, he said quietly, at the compound. For 2 years. Did we ever meet? No. I was kept with the field workers mostly. The important visitors like you only saw the showpieces, the clean facilities, the willing workers, the fiction Voss maintained. The rest of us were kept out of sight. What was it like? It was hell, Mara said simply. Every day wondering if that would be the day someone decided you'd outlived your usefulness. Every night listening to people cry or scream or just give up. It was hell, Mr. Garrett, and you financed it. The banker's shoulders sagged. I can't undo what I've done. No, Elias said, but you can help us make sure it doesn't continue. Write that statement. Give us everything you have on Voss. Help us cut the head off this operation. For a long minute, Garrett sat motionless, staring at nothing. Then he pulled open a desk drawer, slowly, keeping his hands visible, and withdrew paper and a pen. This will take time, he said. Everything I know, every transaction, every meeting, hours, maybe more. We've got all night, Elias said, settling into a chair. Start writing. Garrett began, his pen scratching across paper as he documented years of corruption in careful, precise handwriting. As he wrote, he talked, filling in details that went beyond what the ledger contained. The investors' names, the shell companies, the political connections that kept law enforcement looking the other way. It poured out of him like poison being drawn from a wound, painful but necessary. Mara stood by the window, keeping watch on the street outside. Elias divided his attention between Garrett's writing and the door, ready for trouble that might come from either direction. The clock on the mantel ticked away minutes, then hours, as the statement grew longer. Around midnight, Garrett paused to rest his cramping hand. There's something else you should know, he said, not meeting their eyes. Voss has friends in Denver. Territorial politicians, law enforcement, judges. If you think exposing this operation will bring him down immediately, you're wrong. He's protected. How protected? Elias asked. Enough that he survived 2 previous investigations. Witnesses disappeared or changed their stories. Evidence got lost. Charges were dropped. The man has reach beyond what you're imagining. Then we'll need more than just documents, Mara said, turning from the window. We'll need him caught in the act. Undeniable proof that can't be swept away. Such as? The compound itself, Elias said, understanding where she was going. We raid it, free the workers, gather physical evidence, make it impossible to deny even with political protection. Garrett shook his head. You're talking about assaulting a fortified position with maybe 20 armed guards. 2 of you against 20, that's suicide. 3 of us, Mara corrected, looking at the banker. You're coming with us. Absolutely not. I've given you everything I know. That's where my cooperation ends. No, Elias said quietly. That's where it begins. You want any chance of redemption, any hope of surviving this with something more than prison time, you come with us. You face what you helped create. I'm not a fighter. I'd be useless. You know the compound layout, you know the guard rotations, you know Voss personally, how he thinks, how he reacts to threats. That knowledge is worth 10 guns. Elias leaned forward. Besides, if you stay here, what happens when Voss realizes you've turned? How long before his friends make you disappear? The color drained from Garrett's face again as the reality settled in. He'd crossed a line tonight, and there was no going back. Voss would learn of the betrayal eventually, and when he did, the banker would become a liability to be eliminated. You're saying I'm a dead man either way, Garrett said. I'm saying your only chance of surviving this is helping us end it completely. Right now, tonight, you choose which side of history you want to be on. Garrett looked down at the pages he'd written, then at Mara standing by the window, then finally at Elias. Whatever he saw in their faces made his decision for him. All right, he said quietly. I'll help you. But we need more than just the three of us. Even with knowledge of the compound, 20 guards is too many. Who else is there? Mara asked. Who in this town would stand against Voss? Garrett thought for a moment, then something shifted in his expression. The sheriff is bought and paid for, but there's a deputy, Marcus Walsh. Young, idealistic, still believes in actual justice. He's been asking questions, pushing back against orders. The sheriff keeps him on minor duties to keep him quiet. Would he help? Maybe. If he sees that ledger, if he understands what's really happening, he might. He's got a moral streak that's gotten him in trouble before. Anyone else? There's a woman who runs the telegraph office, Sarah Chen. Her brother was taken by Voss's operation 2 years ago, listed as a voluntary worker, but she's been trying to find him ever since. She'd help if she thought there was a chance of getting him back. Elias considered this. A deputy and a telegraph operator weren't much, but they were better than nothing. And if the telegraph operator could send messages before Voss's people could stop them, they might create enough noise to bring real help. All right, he said. We approach them tomorrow, carefully. If either one seems compromised, we walk away. And if they agree to help, then we move fast. Tomorrow night, we hit the compound. Garrett's hands shook as he gathered the papers he'd written. Tomorrow? That's insane. We need time to plan, to prepare. We don't have time, Mara said. Every hour we wait is another hour for Voss to move against us, to hide evidence, to fortify his position. We move fast or we don't move at all. She's right, Elias agreed. Speed is our only advantage now. Voss thinks we're running, hiding, trying to survive. He doesn't expect us to attack. He's going to kill us all, Garrett said, but he was packing the papers into a leather satchel as he spoke. You understand that, right? This is almost certainly suicide. Maybe, Elias said, standing, but it's suicide that means something, better than living as a coward who looked away while people suffered. They left Garrett's house through the back door, taking side streets back toward the hotel. The town was quiet now, most windows dark, only a few late-night establishments still showing light. Somewhere a dog barked, and in the distance a train whistle sounded, mournful and lonely. At the hotel they climbed the back stairs to avoid the desk clerk. In their room, Elias wedged the chair under the door handle again and checked the window while Mara spread Garrett's statement across the bed, reading through every page. This is damning, she said after a while. Names, amounts, everything. Even with political protection, this could bring down half the territory's power structure. If it reaches the right people. That's where Sarah Chen comes in, the telegraph operator. If she sends this to enough newspapers simultaneously, it'll be impossible to suppress. Elias nodded, but his mind was already moving to the next problem. The compound. 20 guards, fortified position. Even with surprise and a few allies, that's long odds. You've fought longer odds. I've also lost men to long odds. Good men who deserved better. Mara looked at him across the lamplight, her expression softening. You don't have to do this, you know. Even now. You could take Garrett's statement, send it through the telegraph, and disappear back to your mountain. Let the law handle the rest. We both know the law won't handle it. Not fast enough, not thoroughly enough. Voss will slip away, start over somewhere else, and all those people at the compound will stay trapped. So we risk everything to free people we don't know. Yes. Why? Elias was quiet for a moment, trying to find words for something he barely understood himself. Because 30 years ago, I walked away from everything: duty, honor, the idea that one person could make a difference. I built a life around not caring, not being involved, not risking myself for others. And it was empty, Mara, safe but empty. Then I found you in that snow and everything changed. For the first time in decades, something mattered. Someone mattered. I can't walk away from that. Even if it kills you? Especially if it kills me. Better to die for something than live for nothing. Mara smiled, and her eyes were bright. You know, for a hermit who spent 30 years alone, you're surprisingly good at speeches. Don't tell anyone. Ruin my reputation. They spent the rest of the night preparing, checking weapons, reviewing what they knew about the compound layout from Garrett's descriptions, planning approaches, and escape routes. It was almost like being back in the war, the familiar rhythm of pre-battle preparation. Elias had forgotten how much he'd missed it, the clarity that came from having a mission and the means to complete it, or die trying. Dawn came gray and cold, and with it, the next phase of their increasingly desperate plan. They found Deputy Marcus Walsh at a small restaurant near the sheriff's office, eating breakfast alone in a corner booth. He was younger than Elias expected, maybe 25, with an honest face and careful eyes that tracked them as they approached. Deputy Walsh, Elias said, sliding into the booth across from him. The deputy's hand moved toward his gun. Do I know you? No, but we need to talk, and it needs to be somewhere the sheriff won't hear about it. Walsh's eyes narrowed. Whatever you're selling, I'm not buying. Mara sat down next to Elias and placed the ledger on the table, keeping her hand on top of it. We're not selling anything. We're offering you a chance to do what you actually signed up for: protect people and enforce justice. Who are you? People with evidence of crimes happening right under your nose. Crimes your sheriff is being paid to ignore. Interested? Walsh looked at the ledger, then at them, his expression skeptical but curious. I'm listening. They told him an edited version of the story. Enough to explain the ledger, enough to outline Voss's operation, enough to make clear the scope of the corruption. Walsh's expression shifted as they talked, from skepticism to shock to barely controlled anger. The sheriff knows about this? He asked when they finished. The sheriff is on the payroll, Mara said. Has been for years. You've probably noticed he keeps you away from anything involving Voss's operations. Walsh's jaw tightened. I thought I was just being hazed. New deputy getting the boring assignments. But you're saying it's deliberate. It's deliberate, Elias confirmed. They don't trust you because you're not corrupt yet. That makes you valuable to us. What do you want from me? Help. Tonight we're going to raid the compound where Voss keeps his workers. Free them, gather evidence, end this operation. We need someone with legal authority there to make arrests, to make it official. Walsh sat back, processing this. You're talking about an assault. That's not law enforcement. That's vigilante justice. It's the only justice available, Mara said. You've seen how the system works here. Reports get buried, witnesses disappear, evidence vanishes. This is the only way to stop it. And if I say no, then we do it anyway, without you. But it'll be messier, more dangerous, and less likely to result in actual legal consequences for Voss and his partners. The deputy was quiet for a long moment, staring at his cooling breakfast. Finally, he looked up, and there was steel in his young eyes. I joined this job because I believed in justice. Real justice, not the bought and paid for kind. If what you're saying is true, if that ledger is real, then I'm in. It's real, Garrett said, appearing suddenly at their booth. He looked like he hadn't slept, his clothes rumpled, his face haggard. Every word. I know because I helped make it happen. Walsh's hand moved to his gun again. Garrett, what are you doing with these people? Trying to do the right thing for once in my miserable life. The banker slid into the booth next to Mara, making it crowded. I wrote a full confession last night. Names, dates, financial records, everything you need to prove systematic corruption and slavery operation. But it won't matter unless we stop Voss tonight. Why should I trust you? Because if I don't help stop this, I'm a dead man anyway. Voss will find out I talked, and he'll have me killed. My only chance is helping you shut him down completely. Garrett pulled out his satchel and showed Walsh the papers inside. Read these. Then decide if I'm lying. Walsh took the papers and began reading, his expression growing darker with each page. By the time he finished, his hands were shaking with suppressed rage. How many people? He asked quietly. 237 currently at the compound, Mara said. According to the ledger, more scattered at other locations. And the sheriff knows. The sheriff takes money to look the other way, has for years. Walsh carefully folded the papers and handed them back to Garrett. All right, I'm in. What do you need me to do? Stay visible today, Elias said. Act normal. Don't give the sheriff any reason to be suspicious. Tonight at 8, meet us at the north edge of town. Bring your weapon and whatever ammunition you can carry. We move on the compound under cover of darkness. How many are we? 5 if we can recruit the telegraph operator. Walsh laughed, but there was no humor in it. 5 against 20. Those are terrible odds. The best we've got, Elias said. You want better odds. Walk away now. No. Walsh stood, his decision made. I'm done walking away. Tonight, 8 o'clock. I'll be there. He left the restaurant without finishing his breakfast, his back straight and his purpose clear. Elias watched him go and felt something like hope stir in his chest. Maybe they had a chance after all. Telegraph office next, Mara said. If Sarah Chen agrees to help, we'll have communication covered. If not, we improvise. The telegraph office was a small building near the train station, its windows advertising rates for messages to Denver, San Francisco, and points east. Inside, a woman in her mid-30s worked at the telegraph key, her movements practiced and efficient. She looked up as they entered, and Elias saw the wariness in her eyes, the look of someone who'd learned not to trust easily. Help you? She asked. Sarah Chen, Mara stepped forward. We need to talk about your brother. The woman's face went pale. I don't know what you're talking about. James Chen, taken by Voss's operation 2 years ago. You've been trying to find him ever since. Sarah's hands tightened on the telegraph key. Who are you? Someone who was there, Mara said gently. I knew James. He's still alive, Sarah. Still at the compound. For a moment, Sarah just stared, her eyes filling with tears. You're lying. You have to be lying. I've been told he's dead, that he ran away, that he never existed. Every story except the truth. I'm not lying. I worked beside him for 6 months before I escaped. He's alive, and tonight we're going to get him out. But we need your help. Sarah came around the counter, her movements urgent. What help? What do you need? I'll do anything. Elias produced copies of Garrett's statement and the relevant pages from the ledger. These need to go to newspapers in Denver, San Francisco, and Washington. Tonight, after we've started the raid. Can you send them? Sarah scanned the documents, her expression hardening. This is about Voss. This is about shutting down the entire operation and making sure everyone involved faces justice. And my brother? If he's at the compound, and Mara says he is, we'll get him out. You have my word. Sarah looked at each of them in turn, then nodded sharply. I'll send them. Every word to every major newspaper I can reach, but I want proof afterward, proof that James is safe. You'll have it, Mara promised. Tonight, this ends. They spent the rest of the day preparing, moving carefully through town while avoiding notice. Elias purchased additional ammunition and supplies, using the last of the money he'd brought from the cabin. Garrett secured horses and provisions, his banker's credentials still useful for some transactions. Mara stayed hidden, knowing that if Voss's people spotted her, the whole plan would collapse. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, they gathered at the north edge of town. 5 people united by desperation and a slim hope of justice. Elias looked at them each in turn. Mara with her iron determination, Garrett with his guilty conscience, Walsh with his idealistic anger, and Sarah with her desperate hope. Not exactly an army, but it would have to do. The compound is 20 miles north, Elias said, unfolding the map. We ride hard. We can be there by full dark. Garrett, you know the layout. Talk us through it. The banker knelt and drew in the dirt with a stick. Main building here, barracks for workers to the east, guard quarters to the west. Voss keeps his office in the main building, second floor. There's a fence around the whole compound, wood, about 8 feet high, with a single gate. Guard positions? Walsh asked. Usually 2 at the gate, 2 patrolling the perimeter, the rest rotating through shifts inside. At night, maybe half are sleeping. So 10 active guards, 10 in reserve. Still terrible odds. We don't fight them all at once, Elias said. We split up. Walsh and Garrett take the gate, quick and quiet. Mara and I hit the barracks, start getting people out. Sarah, you stay with the horses and be ready to ride for town the moment we signal. Start sending those telegrams before Voss can stop you. And if you don't signal? Sarah asked. Then ride anyway. Make sure those documents get sent no matter what happens to us. They mounted up and rode north under a darkening sky, 5 riders carrying the hopes of 200 prisoners and the weight of years of corruption. The temperature dropped as night fell, and Elias pulled his coat tighter, feeling the familiar pre-battle tension settling into his bones. This was it. After tonight, nothing would be the same. Either they'd win and destroy Voss's empire, or they'd die trying. Elias looked over at Mara riding beside him, her face set with determination, and knew she was thinking the same thing. They'd come too far to turn back now. The compound appeared in the distance, lights glowing against the darkness like a malevolent constellation. From this distance, it looked almost peaceful, just another frontier settlement. But Elias knew better. Behind those walls, people suffered while good men looked away. Not anymore. They dismounted a quarter-mile out and moved forward on foot, weapons ready, hearts pounding. The night air carried the sound of voices from the compound, the clank of metal, the bark of a dog somewhere. Normal sounds from a place that was anything but normal. Elias checked his rifle one final time, caught Mara's eye, and nodded. She nodded back, her hand steady on her Colt. Then they moved into the darkness, and the final battle began. The fence loomed ahead of them, rough-hewn timber standing 8 feet high and casting shadows that swallowed light. Elias crouched in the scrub brush 20 yards out, watching the 2 guards at the gate shift their weight and talk in low voices. They looked bored, complacent, exactly what he'd hoped for. Beside him, Walsh breathed steady and controlled, his deputy's training evident in the way he held himself. On Elias's other side, Garrett trembled slightly, the banker's soft hands gripping a rifle he clearly didn't know how to use properly. But the man was here, and that counted for something. Mara had already circled to the east with their makeshift pack of tools, wire cutters, a pry bar, rope. She'd move along the fence line until she found a spot away from the guard's sight, then cut through and wait for Elias's signal. The plan was simple, because simple plans had fewer ways to fail. Walsh and Garrett would approach the gate openly, pretending to be lost travelers seeking directions. When the guards got close enough, Elias would take them from behind. Quick, quiet, minimal noise. Then they'd open the gate from inside while Mara started evacuating the barracks. Simple? Suicidal? Maybe. But simple. Elias caught Walsh's eye and nodded. The deputy stood, pulling Garrett up with him, and they stumbled toward the gate with exaggerated tiredness, calling out as they approached. "Hello, the gate! We're lost! Need some directions!" The guards straightened, their hands moving to weapons but not drawing. One of them called back, "Camp's closed. Move along." "Please, we've been riding all day," Walsh said, his voice pitched perfectly between desperate and harmless. "Just need to know which way to Silver Ridge. Got turned around in the dark." The guards exchanged glances. One shrugged and started walking toward the gate, his partner following a few steps behind. They were curious now, interested, their attention completely focused on the 2 men in front of them. Perfect. Elias moved like smoke, staying low, using every shadow. He'd crossed half the distance before the guards reached the gate, was within 10 feet when they started unbarring it. The lead guard swung it open, and Walsh kept talking, kept their eyes on him. Elias rose behind them silent as death and brought his rifle butt down on the first guard's head with controlled force. The man dropped without a sound. The second guard started to turn, started to shout, and Walsh's fist caught him square in the jaw. The guard staggered, and Garrett surprised everyone by swinging his rifle like a club, connecting with the man's temple. Both guards lay unconscious in the dirt within seconds. "Strip their weapons," Elias said quietly, already moving to drag the bodies out of sight. "Tie them up and gag them. We've got maybe 5 minutes before someone notices the gates unmanned." They worked fast, binding the guards with rope and leaving them hidden in the shadows beside the fence. Walsh and Garrett collected the guards' rifles and ammunition, and Elias took a moment to survey the compound through the now open gate. 3 buildings dominated the space. The main structure stood directly ahead, 2 stories of weathered wood with light spilling from several windows. To the left, the guard barracks, smaller but solid, with smoke rising from a chimney. To the right, the workers' quarters, a long, low building that looked more like a prison than housing. That's where Mara would be headed. Elias spotted her across the compound, a shadow among shadows, moving along the eastern fence toward the workers' barracks. She'd made it through. Now came the hard part. "Walsh Garrett, you head for the main building," Elias said. "Find Voss's office, secure any documents you can. I'm going to help Mara with the evacuation." "What about the other guards?" Garrett asked, his voice shaking slightly. "Pray they're sleeping, or pray you're a better shot than you look." Elias checked his rifle one more time. "And Garrett? Don't shoot unless you absolutely have to. Gunfire brings everyone running." He moved into the compound before the banker could respond, keeping to the shadows, his eyes tracking every window and doorway. The main building's windows showed movement inside, guards changing shifts maybe, or workers being herded to sleeping quarters. Normal evening activity in a place built on horror. Elias reached the workers' barracks just as Mara emerged from around the corner, her face tight with controlled emotion. "The door's barred from outside," she whispered. "They're locked in." Of course they were. Couldn't have the merchandise wandering off during the night. Elias examined the heavy wooden bar that secured the door. It was held in place by iron brackets, substantial but not impossible. He wedged the pry bar into the gap and leveraged it slowly, quietly, feeling the wood resist and then give with a soft crack that sounded impossibly loud in the darkness. The bar came free, and Elias set it aside, his hand moving to the door handle. "Ready?" Mara nodded, her Colt drawn and ready. He opened the door. The smell hit first, unwashed bodies, sickness, despair. Then his eyes adjusted to the darkness inside, and he saw them. Dozens of people crammed into a space meant for half that many, lying on thin pallets or bare floor, most asleep from exhaustion, but some awake and watching with the hollow eyes of those who'd given up hope. Mara stepped inside, and several people recognized her immediately. A woman gasped, started to speak, and Mara put a finger to her lips. "We're getting you out," she said quietly, "but we have to move fast and stay silent. Wake the others. Anyone who can walk needs to head for the east fence. There's a hole cut through. Beyond that, horses are waiting." "Is this real?" a man asked, his voice cracked and broken. "Or am I dreaming again?" "It's real," Mara said. "I escaped. I came back. Now move." The barracks erupted into controlled chaos as people woke their neighbors, gathered what few possessions they had, and started moving toward the door. Elias positioned himself outside, watching for guards, while Mara organized the exodus. They came in a steady stream, men, women, even a few children, all bearing the marks of prolonged suffering. Thin bodies, scarred skin, the shuffling gait of people who'd been broken and rebuilt into something less than human. But their eyes held something now that they hadn't held before. Hope. "James Chen," Mara was saying to each person as they passed. "Have you seen James Chen?" Most shook their heads or didn't respond, too focused on escape. But then a young woman stopped and pointed back into the barracks. "He's in the back corner, too sick to walk much. They were going to send him to the disposal area tomorrow." Disposal area. Like he was trash instead of a human being. Mara disappeared back into the barracks and emerged moments later supporting a skeletal man who looked like he'd aged 30 years in the two since his sister had seen him. His eyes were glazed with fever and his breathing was labored, but he was alive. "Get him to the horses," Elias said. "Sarah's there. She'll take care of him." "I'm not leaving until everyone's out," Mara said, passing James to another worker who'd stopped to help. "Mara's, everyone. I'm not leaving anyone behind this time." Elias wanted to argue, but knew it would be useless. He understood that determination, that refusal to abandon people to their fate. It was the same thing that had made him pull her from the snow instead of walking away. The stream of people continued, maybe 50 so far, with more coming. Elias checked his pocket watch. They'd been inside the compound for almost 10 minutes, far too long. Any moment now, someone would notice the missing guards, or see the workers escaping, or just get unlucky and glance out the wrong window. That moment came with the sound of a gunshot from the main building. The crack split the night, and everything froze for one heartbeat. Then chaos erupted. Guards poured from the barracks, shouting and grabbing weapons. Windows in the main building lit up as lamps were kindled. Somewhere an alarm bell started ringing. "Go, go, go!" Elias shouted to the workers still emerging from the barracks. "Run for the fence! Don't stop!" They ran, some supporting others, moving as fast as their weakened bodies allowed. Mara stood in the doorway, still ushering people out, and Elias positioned himself between her and the approaching guards. "We need to move," he called to her. 30 more seconds. There are still people inside." 30 seconds they didn't have. Guards were spreading out across the compound now, some pursuing the fleeing workers, others moving to secure the main building. Elias raised his rifle and fired, dropping a guard who was taking aim at the escaping prisoners. That opened the floodgates. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions, bullets kicking up dirt and splintering wood. Elias returned fire methodically, each shot placed with the precision of a man who'd spent years learning exactly how to kill efficiently. Walsh appeared from the direction of the main building, his gun blazing, Garrett stumbling behind him with his arms full of papers. The deputy provided covering fire while the banker ran for the gate, documents flapping in his arms like panicked birds. "Got the records!" Garrett shouted. "Voss isn't here. He's at some estate to the north, but I got everything from his office." Another gunshot, closer this time, and Garrett stumbled. For a terrible moment, Elias thought the banker was hit, but he kept running, kept clutching those papers like they were his redemption made physical. "Mara!" Elias called again. "Done! Everyone's out!" She emerged from the barracks and they ran together toward the fence, weaving between buildings as bullets chased them. Behind them, the compound was in full chaos. Guards shooting at shadows, workers scattering in every direction, fires starting where lamps had been knocked over in the confusion. They reached the hole in the fence and squeezed through. On the other side, Walsh was already there, helping the last of the workers toward where Sarah waited with the horses. The night was full of running figures, shouting voices, the crack of gunfire. "How many did we get out?" Elias asked, reloading his rifle. "Most of them," Mara said, breathing hard. "Maybe 200. Some were too sick to move, some wouldn't leave. But most are free. 200 people. 200 lives no longer owned by monsters. Not bad for a night's work." "Sarah's got James," Walsh said, joining them. "She's already started riding for town with him and about 20 others who can't fight. The rest are scattering into the countryside like you said. Guards won't be able to track them all." "Good. What about Voss?" "Not at the compound," Garrett said, still clutching his papers. "But I found property records, correspondence, everything. He's got an estate 15 miles northeast, built it last year. That's where he'll be." Elias looked at the burning compound behind them, then at Mara. "We go there. Tonight. End this properly." "You're insane," Garrett said. "We just barely survived this. You want to assault another fortified position?" "I want to make sure Nathaniel Voss can never do this again. That means putting him in the ground or in chains. Your choice which." Mara checked her Colt, reloading with practiced efficiency. "I'm with Elias. We finished this." "So am I," Walsh said. "Came this far. Might as well see it through." Garrett looked at all of them, then down at the papers in his arms. Evidence of years of crimes, proof of systematic evil. Finally, he nodded. "All right, but we're not going in blind this time. I've been to the estate. I can tell you the layout." They gathered what horses remained and rode northeast, following directions Garrett provided. Behind them, the compound continued to burn, flames reaching toward the night sky like prayers of the damned finally being answered. Elias glanced back once and felt grim satisfaction. One head of the Hydra cut off. Now for the other. The ride took an hour through rough country, following game trails and creek beds. Garrett led them with surprising confidence, his earlier fear replaced by something harder. Maybe seeing the reality of what he'd financed had finally broken through his comfortable denial. Maybe he just wanted to survive. Either way, he was useful now. The estate appeared suddenly, cresting a rise. A sprawling manor house of stone and timber, ostentatious in its display of wealth. Lights blazed from every window and figures moved behind curtains. Guards patrolled the perimeter, visible in the lamplight. "He knows we're coming," Walsh said. "Someone from the compound must have sent word." "Good," Elias said. "Let him know. Let him prepare." "Won't matter." They dismounted and approached on foot, using the terrain for cover. The estate sat in a valley with open ground on all sides. Defensible, but that worked both ways. Hard to assault, but also hard to escape from.
How many guards? Mara asked Garrett. Last time I was here, maybe a dozen, but if he's expecting trouble, could be more. Main entrance? Front and back. Heavy doors, probably barred. Windows are all on the second floor, too high to reach easily. Elias studied the building, his tactical mind working through options. Direct assault was suicide. They needed something else, something unexpected. His eyes fell on the stables adjacent to the main house, and an idea formed. Fire, he said. We burn the stables, create chaos, make them think we're going for the horses. When they rush out to deal with it, we go in through the back. That's your plan? Garrett asked. Set a fire and hope it works? You have a better one? The banker was silent. Thought not. Walsh, Mara, you're with me on the back entrance. Garrett, you start the fire, then fall back to the horses. If this goes wrong, you ride for town and make sure Sarah sends those telegrams. But what about you? We'll be right behind you, or we won't. Either way, the story gets told. They split up, Garrett heading toward the stables while the other three circled to the back of the manor. Elias could hear voices from inside, angry and loud. Someone was shouting orders, probably Voss himself, organizing his defense. The fire started with a whoosh that lit the night orange. Flames climbed the stable walls with hungry speed, and horses inside screamed in terror. The reaction was immediate. Guards poured from the manor house, running toward the stables, shouting about water and buckets. Now, Elias said, and they moved. The back door was barred as expected, but with most of the guards distracted, they had time to work. Elias used the pry bar again, muscles straining as he leveraged against wood and iron. Something cracked, then gave, and the door swung open into darkness. They entered with guns ready, moving through what appeared to be a kitchen and servants' quarters. Empty. Everyone had rushed to deal with the fire. The main house opened before them like a maze, hallways and rooms, stairs leading up and down, too many places for enemies to hide. Voss's study will be on the second floor, Walsh whispered. Men like him always put their offices high up, looking down on everyone else. They climbed stairs carefully, every creak of wood sounding like thunder. The second-floor hallway stretched before them, lined with doors. Light spilled from one room at the far end, and voices carried from inside. Told you they'd come. I told everyone, but nobody listens. Now the compound's burning, and half my inventory is scattered across the territory. Nathaniel Voss. Had to be. The voice carried authority and fury in equal measure. Elias led them down the hall, rifle ready, each step measured. They reached the door and he risked a glance inside. A study, lavishly appointed, with a massive desk dominating one wall. Behind it stood a man in his 50s, well-dressed and groomed, pacing like a caged animal. Two guards flanked him, hands on their weapons. The Vance woman, Voss was saying. This is her doing. I should have killed her when I had the chance instead of making an example of her. Sentiment is expensive. We can still find her, sir, one guard said. The men are incompetent. She's already here, you fool. Probably in this house right now. Elias stepped into the doorway, rifle leveled. You're right about that. The guards went for their guns, and Elias shot one, while Walsh took the other. Both men dropped before they could clear leather. Voss froze behind his desk, his face going from red with anger to white with fear in an instant. Don't move, Elias said quietly. We've had enough killing tonight. Mara stepped into the room, and Voss's eyes locked onto her. Recognition and disbelief warred across his face. Mara, he said. You came back. I came to end this, she said, her voice steady despite the gun shaking slightly in her hand. 2 years. 2 years you owned me, beat me, used me, made me less than human. You signed a contract. I signed paper I couldn't read when I was starving and desperate. You call that a contract? Voss straightened, some of his composure returning. I provide opportunities for people who have nothing. Give them food, shelter, purpose. It's a service. It's slavery, Walsh said. And you're under arrest for operating an illegal bondage operation, human trafficking, and about 50 other charges I'll think of on the ride to jail. You have no authority here, deputy. This estate is private property, and you're outside your jurisdiction. I've got plenty of authority.
Walsh said, pulling his badge from his pocket. This says I can arrest criminals anywhere in the territory. You're a criminal. Math's pretty simple. Voss's eyes darted toward the door, calculating odds, measuring chances of escape. Elias saw the thought forming and shifted his aim slightly. Don't, he said. You run, I shoot. You fight, I shoot. You do anything except put your hands on that desk, I shoot. We clear? For a long moment, Voss just stared at them. Then something shifted in his expression, the fear fading, replaced by cold calculation. You think arresting me changes anything? He asked. You think this operation ends because you burned one compound and raided my house? I have friends, Deputy, real friends with real power. Judges, senators, territorial governors. By this time tomorrow, I'll be free and you'll be looking for work. If you're lucky. Maybe, Mara said, stepping closer. But it won't matter. Because even if you buy your way out of jail, everyone will know what you are. The ledger's already been sent to newspapers across the territory. Your name, your crimes, your partners, all of it public. You can't buy back your reputation. Voss's confidence cracked. You're bluffing. Am I? Check your telegraph lines. See if they're still working. They won't be because we cut them before we came here. But the lines in Silver Ridge are working just fine, and right now Sarah Chen is sending your entire operation to every paper that will listen. Sarah? Voss's face twisted. That little bitch. Her brother was barely worth the food we gave him. Should have disposed of him months ago. Mara's gun came up, and for a moment Elias thought she'd shoot. Her finger tightened on the trigger, her face a mask of rage and justice denied for too long. Do it, Voss said, seeing the gun aimed at his chest. Pull that trigger. Prove you're no better than me. Prove that all this moral outrage is just revenge with better packaging.
Don't, Elias said quietly to Mara. He's not worth it. He deserves to die. Maybe, but you deserve better than carrying his death with you for the rest of your life. Let the law handle him. Let him stand trial, face his victims, live with everyone knowing what he is. Mara's hand trembled, the gun wavering. Then slowly, painfully, she lowered it. You're right. He's not worth it. Voss actually laughed. Weak, just like before. That's why you'll always be property, Mara. You don't have the strength to... She shot him. Not in the chest or head. Somewhere survivable. His leg, above the knee, shattering bone and dropping him behind his desk with a scream. Blood pooled quickly, and Voss clutched at the wound with shaking hands. I said you weren't worth killing, Mara said coldly. Didn't say you weren't worth shooting. Now you get to live, but you'll remember this moment every time you take a step. Remember the woman you tried to break coming back and putting a bullet in you? We need to stop the bleeding, Walsh said, already moving around the desk. Can't let him die before trial. They bound Voss's wound with strips torn from his expensive curtains, the irony not lost on any of them. Outside, the fire at the stables was being brought under control, and guards were starting to realize something was wrong in the main house. Time to go, Elias said. Walsh, can you get him on a horse? I'll manage. You two get out of here. Head for the horses. We're not leaving you. I'm law enforcement. I've got authority to be here. You two are vigilantes who just shot a man in his own home. Go, before someone sees you and complicates things. Elias wanted to argue, but knew the deputy was right. The documents? Garrett has them. Along with everything I took from Voss's office. Enough evidence to bury everyone involved. Walsh hauled Voss to his feet, ignoring the man's groans of pain. Now go. I'll take him to jail in Silver Ridge and start the process. By morning, this whole thing breaks open. Elias and Mara left through a side window, dropping to the ground and running for the horses. Behind them, the manor house erupted into shouting as guards discovered their boss bleeding in his study. But by then they were already mounted and riding hard into the darkness, leaving chaos and justice in equal measure behind them. They found Garrett a mile out, waiting with the horses as promised. The banker looked exhausted and terrified, but intact. The stolen document still clutched to his chest. Did you get him? Garrett asked as they approached. We got him, Mara said. Alive. Walsh is taking him to jail. Then it's over? Not quite, Elias said. Still need to make sure those telegrams get sent. Make sure the story breaks before Voss's friends can suppress it. And we need to get you somewhere safe until this all shakes out. They rode through what remained of the night, pushing the horses as hard as they dared.
Dawn found them on the outskirts of Silver Ridge, exhausted and running on nothing but determination. Sarah Chen met them at the telegraph office, her face streaked with tears of joy. "James is alive," she said, grabbing Mara in a fierce hug. "Sick, but alive. The doctor says he'll recover. You brought him back to me." "We brought all of them back," Mara said. 200 people who were owned are free now." "The telegrams?" Elias asked. "Sent. Every major newspaper from here to Washington. I sent them twice just to be sure. By noon, everyone will know about Voss, about Garrett, about all of it." Garrett flinched at hearing his name but didn't argue. He'd known this was coming, had accepted it as the price of redemption. "What happens to me now?" the banker asked. "That's up to the courts," Elias said. "But you helped us. That counts for something." "Not enough to avoid prison." "No, probably not. But it's enough to let you sleep at night. Maybe that's worth something too." The sun rose over Silver Ridge, painting the town in shades of gold and pink, and Elias felt something he hadn't felt in 30 years. Peace. Not the empty peace of solitude, but the earned peace of justice delivered and wrongs partially righted. The kind that came from standing against evil and refusing to back down even when the odds were impossible. Mara stood beside him watching the sunrise, and when she reached out and took his hand, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. "What now?" she asked. "Now we wait for the storm to break. Let the law do its work. Make sure everyone involved faces consequences." "And after?" Elias thought about his cabin in the mountains, still standing if the winter hadn't been too harsh. Thought about 30 years of solitude that had felt safe but never felt whole. Thought about these past days of purpose and connection and knowing that what you did mattered. "After," he said, "we figure out what comes next. Together." Mara smiled, and it transformed her face completely. "Together sounds good." The storm broke exactly as predicted. By afternoon, newspapers across the territory were running stories about the slavery operation, about Nathaniel Voss and his network of corruption, about the banker who'd helped finance it all. Names were published, evidence was examined, and the machinery of justice, slow but inexorable, began to turn. Voss was formally charged with dozens of crimes. His friends tried to help but found themselves suddenly unavailable as their own involvement came to light. The dominoes fell one after another, each revelation leading to more questions, more investigations, more arrests. Garrett received a sentence of 10 years for his role, but was credited with cooperation. The judge who sentenced him noted that his testimony and documents had been crucial in breaking the case. Walsh was promoted to sheriff after his predecessor was arrested for corruption. His first act was hiring new deputies who believed in actual justice instead of the bought kind. Sarah Chen's brother recovered slowly, and she never stopped thanking Mara for bringing him home. The two women became close, bonded by shared trauma and shared survival. And Elias and Mara rode back to the mountain together, not because they had nowhere else to go, but because they'd earned the right to choose peace after fighting so hard for it. The cabin stood exactly as he'd left it, weathered but solid, still defiant against the wilderness. They spent their first day there cleaning, repairing, making space for two lives instead of one. That night, sitting by the fire with coffee and comfortable silence, Mara spoke. "Thank you," she said, "for pulling me from the snow, for not walking away, for seeing this through." "Thank you," Elias replied, "for reminding me what matters, for showing me that hiding from the world isn't the same as living." They sat together as the fire burned low and the mountain settled into its ancient rhythms around them. Outside, the wilderness stretched vast and indifferent. Inside, two people who'd been broken by different kinds of violence began the slow work of healing. Not alone anymore. Never alone again. Just two souls who'd found each other in the snow and decided that survival wasn't enough. They wanted to actually live. And in the frozen beauty of the Montana high country, surrounded by mountains that had witnessed everything and judged nothing, they finally found what they'd been searching for all along. Home. But peace, Elias had learned long ago, was never permanent. It was something you fought for, earned, and defended, not something that simply existed. 3 weeks after they returned to the cabin, a rider came up the mountain. Elias spotted him from a distance while checking the trapline, a single figure moving through the snow with purpose rather than the meandering path of someone lost. He watched through his field glasses until he could make out details. A young man, well dressed for travel, riding a good horse and leading a pack animal. Not a threat, probably, but definitely intentional. By the time Elias made it back to the cabin, the rider had already arrived and was talking to Mara on the porch. She had her hand near her Colt but hadn't drawn it, which Elias took as a good sign. "Elias Crow?" the young man asked as he approached. He couldn't have been more than 25, with the earnest face of someone who still believed the world could be fixed. "Depends who's asking." "My name is Thomas Brennan. I'm a reporter for the Denver Chronicle. I've been covering the Voss case, and I was hoping to speak with both of you." Elias exchanged a glance with Mara. They'd known this was coming eventually. The newspapers had been full of the story for weeks, and sooner or later someone would track down the people at the center of it. "We already gave statements to the law," Mara said. "Don't know what else we can tell you." "I'm not looking for legal testimony," Brennan said quickly. "I want to tell the human story, the people behind the headlines, what it was like, what you went through, why you fought back when most people would have just run." "Most people don't have a choice about running," Mara said, and there was an edge to her voice. "I know. I'm sorry. I didn't mean—" Brennan stopped, took a breath, started again. "Look, I've interviewed dozens of the freed workers, heard their stories, documented their suffering, but they all say the same thing when I ask how they got free. They say a woman came back for them, a woman who escaped and could have kept running, but chose to return instead. They say she's a hero." Mara's jaw tightened. "I'm not a hero. I'm just someone who got angry enough to stop being afraid." That's exactly the story people need to hear. Brennan pulled a notebook from his coat. Right now, the papers are full of legal proceedings and political fallout. Important, sure, but distant. People read those stories and they're just words. But your story, a woman who survived hell and fought her way back to free others, that's the kind of story that changes minds. That makes people care. "Why should we care if people care?" Elias asked. "The operation's shut down, Voss is in jail, justice is being served. What more do you want?" "I want to make sure it stays shut down, that this never happens again." Brennan's voice carried a passion that reminded Elias of Walsh, young, idealistic, still believing that truth mattered. "Right now there are 37 men on trial because of what you two did. 37. But there are hundreds more who got away, who were smart enough to cover their tracks or rich enough to buy protection. If this story fades, if people forget, those men go back to business as usual. But if we keep it alive, keep reminding people what happened and why it matters, maybe we prevent the next Nathaniel Voss." Mara looked at Elias, a question in her eyes. He recognized the look. She was asking if this was worth it, if opening old wounds for public consumption served any purpose beyond satisfying a reporter's ambition. "Give us a minute," Elias said to Brennan. They walked around to the side of the cabin, out of earshot. The morning was clear and cold, the kind of day that made the mountains look close enough to touch. "What do you think?" Mara asked. "I think he's right about the story mattering, but I also think it'll cost you. Once your name and face are in the papers, you stop being a person and become a symbol. People will want pieces of you, your time, your story, your pain. It never ends." "You sound like you're speaking from experience." Elias was quiet for a moment. "After the war, they wanted to make heroes out of some of us, wanted to parade us around, have us give speeches, inspire the next generation. I saw what it did to the men who agreed. They stopped being themselves and became what people needed them to be. It ate them alive." "But you didn't agree." "I ran. Came to this mountain and spent 30 years hiding from exactly this kind of attention." Mara nodded slowly. "And if you could do it again? Knowing what you know now?" That was the question, wasn't it? If he'd shared his story back then, talked about what he'd seen and done and survived, maybe it would have helped someone. Maybe it would have prevented some suffering, inspired some good. Or maybe it would have just been words in newspapers, forgotten as soon as the next crisis came along. "I don't know," Elias admitted, "but I know this. We didn't fight Voss just for the 200 people we freed. We fought him because what he was doing was wrong, and someone needed to stop it. If telling your story prevents even one more person from suffering the way you did, isn't that worth something? Even if it costs me my privacy? My peace?" That's not for me to decide, but I'll support whatever choice you make. Mara looked out at the mountains, at the vast wilderness that had sheltered them both. When she spoke again, her voice was steady. I spent 2 years being silenced, having no voice, no story, no existence beyond what Voss allowed me. Maybe it's time I take that back. On my terms. They returned to find Brennan waiting patiently, his notebook still closed. Mara stood in front of him and met his eyes. I'll talk to you, she said. But we do this my way. No embellishment, no dramatic exaggeration, no turning me into something I'm not. I tell you what happened, you write it down accurately, and that's the end of it. We clear? Crystal clear, Brennan said, relief evident on his face. Thank you, both of you. They spent the next 6 hours talking. Brennan asked questions, and Mara answered, starting with her arrival in the territory 2.5 years ago. Young, hopeful, looking for opportunity in the growing West. She talked about meeting Voss's recruiters, about signing papers she couldn't properly read, about realizing too late that she'd sold herself into bondage. Then came the hard part. The collar, the work, the beatings, the systematic breaking of human will. She spoke about it clinically, keeping emotion out of her voice, but Elias saw the cost in her eyes. Each memory was a fresh wound, and she was choosing to open them all for a stranger with a notebook. Brennan wrote it all down, his pencil scratching across paper, his expression growing darker as the story progressed. When Mara reached the part about her escape, about stumbling through the snow expecting to die, he stopped writing and just listened. And then Elias found you, he said quietly. And then Elias found me, pulled me out of the snow, brought me here, saved my life. Everything that came after started with that moment. Brennan turned to Elias. Why? Why risk yourself for a stranger? It was the same question Elias had asked himself 100 times since that night. He still didn't have a perfect answer. Because she needed help, and I could provide it. Sometimes it's that simple. Nothing about what you two did was simple. You assaulted a compound, freed 200 people, brought down a criminal empire. That goes beyond helping a stranger. It started with helping a stranger, Elias corrected. Everything else followed from that first choice. You save one life, that life shows you others who need saving, and suddenly you're in deeper than you ever planned. But by then it's too late to walk away. Would you have walked away if you could? Elias looked at Mara, saw her watching him with those gray eyes that had seen so much darkness and still found light. No, I wouldn't have. Brennan finished his notes as the sun began its descent toward the western peaks. He thanked them both profusely, promised to send them a copy of the article before publication, and rode back down the mountain with his pack animal loaded with the story that would, in his words, change everything. After he left, Mara stood on the porch, watching the sunset paint the snow gold and crimson. Elias joined her, 2 cups of coffee in his hands, and they stood in comfortable silence. Do you think it'll matter? She asked finally. The article, the story, will it actually change anything? I think it'll change some things for some people, and maybe that's enough. I hope so, because if I just relived all that for nothing, I'm going to be very annoyed. Elias smiled despite himself. Over the past weeks, he'd seen Mara slowly reclaim pieces of herself that Voss had tried to destroy. Her humor, her strength, her ability to hope. Each small moment felt like a victory. The article ran 3 weeks later, spread across the front page of the Denver Chronicle with the headline, "The Woman Who Came Back, Inside the Fight Against Montana's Slavery Empire." Brennan had kept his word. The story was accurate, unflinching, and powerful. It spread like wildfire through the territory and beyond, picked up by papers in San Francisco, Chicago, even New York. Letters started arriving at the cabin within days, some from other survivors of labor operations thanking Mara for giving them courage, some from politicians and activists asking her to testify at hearings or speak at rallies, some from families of workers who'd been freed expressing gratitude that Elias suspected would never fully capture what they felt. And one letter from Walsh in Silver Ridge marked urgent. Elias opened it while Mara was chopping wood, his eyes scanning the deputies, now sheriffs, hurried handwriting. Problem, he said when Mara came back inside. What kind? The kind where Voss's trial is falling apart. His lawyers got most of the physical evidence suppressed on technicalities. Without the ledger and Garrett's testimony, They might not have enough to convict him. Mara set down the axe carefully.
The ledger was sent to the newspapers. It's public record. But it was obtained illegally,
Stolen from Voss's property by you when you escaped. His lawyers are arguing it's inadmissible. Same with anything we took from his estate during the raid. Fruit of the poisonous tree, they call it. And Garrett's testimony? Still valid, but they're attacking his credibility. Convicted felon trying to reduce his sentence by lying about his former partner.
The jury's not buying it the way they should. Mara's hands clenched into fists. So after everything, the raid, the freed workers, the evidence, all of it, he might walk free. Walsh says there's one thing that could change the jury's mind. Live testimony from someone who was there, who experienced it directly, who can put a human face on the crimes. He's asking if you'll come to Silver Ridge and testify. The color drained from Mara's face. Testify. In open court. In front of Voss.
You'd have legal protection. Walsh would make sure of it, but yes, you'd have to face him again. For a long moment, Mara just stood there, staring at nothing. Elias could see her fighting internal battles, the trauma of what she'd endured versus the need to see justice done, the desire for peace versus the responsibility she felt to others still suffering. "I can't," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can't go back there. Can't be in the same room with him again. I'm not strong enough."
Yes, you are.
"You don't understand."
I understand perfectly.
"You're terrified. You've spent weeks building a new life here, finding peace, healing, and now someone's asking you to tear all that open again, to relive your worst memories in front of strangers while the man who caused them watches. It's not fair, and it's not right to ask that of you." "Then why are you—" "Because it's necessary." Elias set down Walsh's letter and moved to stand in front of her.
Because 200 people got free, but thousands more are still trapped in operations just like Voss's. Because if he walks, every other monster like him learns they can get away with it too. And because you're the only one who can stop that from happening. What if I freeze? What if I get up there and can't speak, or he says something that breaks me, or I make it worse instead of better? Then I'll be right there with you, every second. And if it gets too hard, we leave.
"But Mara, you're the strongest person I've ever met. You survived 2 years of hell and still had the courage to go back and free others. You can survive a few hours in a courtroom." Mara's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. "I hate this. I hate that after everything, they still have power over me." "They don't. You're choosing to face them, which means you have the power. That's the difference." She was quiet for a long time, and Elias let her be, let her work through the decision on her own. Finally, she took a deep breath and nodded. "All right, I'll testify, but you're coming with me." "Wouldn't dream of being anywhere else." They rode to Silver Ridge 4 days later, the journey taking twice as long as the desperate flight that had brought them there months ago. This time there was no urgency, no hunters pursuing them, just two people traveling to face a past that refused to stay buried. Walsh met them at the edge of town, looking older than his years. The weight of his new position showed in the lines around his eyes and the gray starting to appear in his hair. "Thank you for coming," he said, gripping Mara's hand. "I know what this costs you. Just tell me it'll matter. Tell me this isn't for nothing. It'll matter. The jury's wavering right now. They want to believe Voss is guilty, but his lawyers have created just enough doubt. Your testimony could tip the balance." "When?" "Tomorrow morning. Trial resumes at 9. I'll have deputies around you the whole time for protection." They spent the night at the Territorial Grand again, the same hotel where they'd first confronted Garrett. Elias barely slept, his body remembering the last time they'd been in Silver Ridge, the tension, the violence, the constant awareness that death was one mistake away. Mara didn't sleep at all. He heard her pacing, heard the quiet sound of tears she thought he couldn't hear, heard her rehearsing what she'd say in a voice so small it broke his heart. At dawn, he found her on the balcony, staring at the sunrise. "Second thoughts?" he asked gently. "100th thoughts. But I'm still going through with it." "You don't have to." "Yes, I do. Not for Voss or the jury or even for justice. For me. I need to look him in the eye and speak my truth, and I need him to hear it. I need to take that power back." The courthouse was packed when they arrived, every seat filled with reporters, freed workers, curious townspeople, and those connected to the case. Elias felt their eyes follow Mara as Walsh led them to seats behind the prosecutor's table. Whispers rippled through the crowd. That's her, the woman from the article. She came back. Then the side door opened and Voss was brought in. He looked diminished from when they'd last seen him, thinner, older, his expensive clothes replaced with prisoner gray. But his eyes were the same, cold and calculating and full of contempt for everyone around him. Those eyes found Mara immediately, and something like a smile crossed his face. Elias saw Mara flinch, saw her hands clench in her lap. He reached over and covered them with his own, a silent reminder that she wasn't alone. The judge entered and the trial resumed. The prosecutor called several witnesses, freed workers who testified about conditions at the compound, guards who'd turned state's evidence, financial experts who explained the money trail. Each one chipped away at Voss's defense, but his lawyers were skilled, finding inconsistencies, creating doubt, making what should have been clear-cut crimes seem ambiguous and complex. Then the prosecutor called Mara Vance to the stand. The walk to the witness box felt impossibly long. Mara's legs shook and her breathing was too fast, but she made it, sat down, and placed her hand on the Bible for swearing in. Her voice cracked on "I do," but it was audible. The prosecutor approached gently, a middle-aged woman named Catherine Pierce who'd made her career fighting injustice. Miss Vance, can you tell the court how you came to be involved with Mr. Voss's operation? Mara took a breath and began. Her voice was quiet at first, almost inaudible, and the judge asked her to speak up. She tried again, louder this time, and the words came easier. She told the story she'd told Brennan, but this time it was under oath. This time it was official. This time it mattered in ways that would change lives. She described the recruitment, the contract, the realization that she'd been trapped. Described the collar, the work, the systematic brutality designed to break resistance. Her voice grew stronger as she spoke, the fear gradually replaced by something harder, anger, righteousness, the fury of someone who'd been silent too long. Voss's lawyer objected frequently, trying to derail her testimony with technical challenges. Each time, Judge Morrison overruled him, and each time Mara continued speaking with more confidence. Miss Vance, Pierce said after Mara had described her 2 years of captivity, why did you go back? After escaping, after nearly dying, why return to the compound? Because I knew what was happening there, knew people were suffering, and I couldn't live with myself if I just saved my own life and left everyone else behind. That was incredibly brave. No, it was necessary. Bravery is a choice. This was an obligation. Pierce smiled slightly. Can you identify the man responsible for your captivity? The man who owned the operation, who profited from your suffering? Mara looked directly at Voss for the first time since taking the stand, held his gaze without flinching. Nathaniel Voss, the defendant. Thank you, Miss Vance. No further questions. Voss's lawyer stood for cross-examination, a sharp-faced man named Blackwood who'd built his reputation defending the indefensible. He approached the stand with theatrical confidence. Miss Vance, you claim you were held against your will, yet you remained at the compound for 2 years. Why didn't you simply leave? I wore an iron collar that marked me as escaped property. I had no money, no resources, no way to survive outside the compound. And I'd seen what happened to others who tried to run. They were hunted down and brought back or killed. Allegedly hunted down. We only have your word for that. You have the word of 200 freed workers who all tell the same story. Blackwood's expression tightened. You stole property from Mr. Voss when you escaped, a ledger containing confidential business information. Do you deny this? I took evidence of crimes. There's a difference. Did you have legal authority to take this ledger? I had moral authority. Legal authority was too busy taking bribes to care. The courtroom erupted in murmurs and the judge banged his gavel. Blackwood pressed on, trying to rattle her, but Mara met every question with steady resolve. She didn't waver, didn't back down, didn't let him twist her words or diminish her truth. Finally, Blackwood played his last card. Miss Vance, isn't it true that you shot my client, that you entered his home illegally and shot him without provocation? I shot a man who'd enslaved me for 2 years, a man who was about to escape justice because of technicalities and bought lawyers. And I'd do it again. So you admit to attempted murder? I admit to shooting a monster. Whether that's attempted murder or public service is for the jury to decide. Even the judge struggled not to smile at that. Blackwood, realizing he was losing the exchange, dismissed her curtly and sat down. But Mara wasn't finished. She looked at the jury, at the 12 men and women who would decide Voss's fate, and spoke directly to them. I know his lawyers will say I'm biased, that my testimony can't be trusted because I'm a victim seeking revenge. Maybe that's true. Maybe I do want revenge. But that doesn't make my testimony less true. 200 people were freed from that compound. All of them have stories like mine. All of them bear scars from what Nathaniel Voss did. You can dismiss my words if you want, but you can't dismiss their suffering. And if you let him walk free, you're telling every person in this territory that it's acceptable to own human beings as long as you're rich enough and connected enough to get away with it. She stood and left the witness box, and the silence in the courtroom was absolute. Elias met her at the gate and they walked out together, leaving Voss and his lawyers and the whole machinery of justice behind. Outside, Mara finally let herself shake. Elias held her while she cried, not from sadness, but from the sheer relief of having survived the ordeal. You did it, he said quietly. You faced him, and you didn't break. I thought I would. I was so sure I'd freeze or fall apart. But you didn't. You were magnificent. The jury deliberated for 7 hours. When they returned, their verdict was unanimous, guilty on all counts. Voss received 40 years in territorial prison, the maximum sentence possible. His lawyers immediately filed appeals, but everyone knew they were doomed to fail. The tide had turned, and Nathaniel Voss would spend the rest of his life paying for his crimes. Walsh found them at the hotel that evening. 37 total convictions so far, with more coming. The operation's completely dismantled. Every person you freed is getting documentation of their release, legal standing, and access to support services. Some are staying in the territory, some heading home, but all of them are free. What about others, Mara asked, other operations like Voss's? The territorial governor has ordered investigations into labor practices across 6 counties. Your testimony sparked something. People are paying attention now, demanding accountability. It won't end overnight, but it's a start. A start, Mara repeated. I guess that's all we can ask for. They left Silver Ridge the next morning and returned to the mountain. This time the journey felt different, lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted. They'd done what they could, said what needed saying, and now they could finally rest. The cabin welcomed them back with its familiar creaking and the smell of pine. Elias built up the fire while Mara unpacked their supplies, both of them falling into routines that were becoming comfortable through repetition. That night, as they sat by the fire, Mara spoke. I never asked you what you wanted. After all this, what comes next for Elias Crow? Honestly, I don't know. Spent 30 years knowing exactly what I wanted. Solitude, peace, distance from the world. Now, all that seems empty. So what's the alternative? Elias looked at her across the firelight. Building something new. Not running from the world, but finding a way to exist in it that doesn't require me to be alone. Maybe helping others the way we help those workers. Maybe just living a life that means something beyond survival. That sounds exhausting. Probably, but also probably worth it. Mara smiled. You've changed, Mountain Man. When I first woke up here, you were all grit and granite. Now you're talking about meaning and purpose. You changed me, reminded me that being alive and living are different things. We changed each other, Mara corrected. I was broken when you found me. You helped me remember how to be whole. They sat in silence for a while, watching the fire, listening to the wind outside. Finally, Mara spoke again. I got a letter today, before we left town, from Sarah Chen. How's her brother? Better, recovering, but that's not why she wrote. She's organizing something, a support network for people freed from labor operations, helping them find housing, jobs, legal assistance. She asked if I wanted to be involved. Do you? Part of me wants to say no, wants to stay here with you and forget the world exists, but the other part knows I can't do that. Not after everything, not when there are people who still need help. Elias nodded slowly. So you go. You help them. And I'll be here when you need to come back. Or, Mara said carefully,
You come with me. We do this together. Build something that helps people, that makes a difference. Turn all this pain into something useful. The offer hung in the air between them, an invitation to a future neither had planned, but both could envision. Elias thought about his cabin, his mountain, his carefully constructed solitude. Thought about how empty it had all been before Mara arrived. Together, he said finally. I like the sound of that. Over the following months, they divided their time between the mountain and the work. Mara became the face of the Survivor Network, traveling to speak with freed workers, organizing support services, advocating for legal reforms. Elias worked behind the scenes, using his military experience to train security for vulnerable communities, his mountain wisdom to teach survival skills to those starting over. They weren't alone in the effort. Walsh used his position as sheriff to push for stricter labor laws. Garrett, after serving 3 years of his sentence, was released early for good behavior and immediately dedicated himself to financial transparency reform. Sarah Chen's network grew to encompass 6 territories, helping hundreds of people rebuild their lives. And slowly, painfully, the territory began to change. The article Brennan had written became a book, then a series of legislative hearings, then actual laws protecting workers' rights. It wasn't fast and it wasn't complete, but it was progress. 2 years after the trial, Elias and Mara stood on the cabin porch watching the sunset. She was preparing for another trip, 3 weeks traveling to mining camps where labor abuses had been reported. He was packing his own supplies for a journey to train volunteer security for worker housing. Do you ever regret it? Mara asked. Pulling me from that snow? Everything that came after? Elias considered the question seriously. His life had become complicated, demanding, frequently exhausting. He'd lost his peaceful solitude, his simple routines, his carefully maintained distance from human suffering, but he'd gained purpose, connection, love. Though neither of them had used that word yet, he'd gained a reason to wake up that went beyond simple survival. Not for a second, he said. Even though your quiet mountain life is gone? That life was already gone. I just didn't know it until you showed up. Mara leaned against him, and they stood together watching the sky turn from blue to gold to crimson. The mountains stretched vast around them, indifferent as always to human drama, witness to everything and judge of nothing. Somewhere down in the valley, people were going about their lives, working, loving, surviving. Some were still trapped in situations they couldn't escape. Some were fighting their way free. Some were just beginning to understand they had choices. And tomorrow, Elias and Mara would continue the work of helping them realize those choices. Not because they were heroes or saints, but because they'd learned through blood and snow and fire that sometimes the only way to heal yourself was to help others heal too. The sun finally set, leaving the sky burning with afterglow. Inside the cabin, the fire waited to be lit, coffee to be made, plans to be finalized. The mountain would be here when they returned, patient and eternal. But for now, they had work to do. Mara turned to go inside, then paused. Hey, Elias. Yeah? Thank you for everything, for saving me, for fighting with me, for building this life with me, for being brave enough to let someone in. Elias pulled her close, this woman who'd changed everything by refusing to give up, who'd shown him that survival wasn't enough when you could actually live. Thank you, he replied, for being worth saving, for reminding me why any of this matters. They went inside together, closing the door against the mountain cold, but not against the world. They'd tried that once, isolation, distance, safety through solitude. Now they knew better. The world needed people willing to stand against darkness, needed people who'd look at suffering and refuse to turn away, needed people who understood that one person could make a difference, even if that difference started with something as simple as pulling a stranger from the snow. Elias Crow had spent 30 years learning how to survive alone, but in the end, it took Mara Vance to teach him how to actually live. And in the frozen beauty of the Montana wilderness, surrounded by mountains that had seen civilizations rise and fall, two people who'd been forged by fire and ice built a life worth fighting for. Not perfect, not easy, but real and meaningful in theirs. Together they'd turned their pain into purpose, their survival into salvation for others. They'd proven that even in the darkest places, even when all hope seemed lost, courage could be found in the most unexpected places.
in a cabin on a mountain, in the heart of a woman who refused to stay broken, in the soul of a man who learned that isolation wasn't strength, it was just another kind of prison. They'd broken free of those prisons and built something better. And every person they helped, every life they changed, every small victory against injustice was proof that pulling someone from the snow could change the world. One life at a time, one choice at a time, one act of courage that refused to look away. That was their legacy. That was their triumph. That was how the mountain chose them, and how they chose to answer its call. Not with silence, but with action. Not with solitude, but with solidarity. Not with survival alone, but with a life fully lived in service of something greater than themselves. And in the end, that made all the difference.